pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As you know, we have two meetings tonight. The first meeting is our reorganization meeting. For the purpose of that meeting, I'll be the pro tem, and we will elect our officers, appoint the township secretary, and then public participation and adjourn, and we'll start the second meeting with the new officers. So, I'd like to open the election of president, open for nominations.
I'd like to move to nominate John Fisher for president.
Second.
I'd like to move to nominate Don Curley for president.
Second.
Okay, we have any further nominations? Vote in the order that they were nominated. First is John Fisher. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's 4 votes, so we don't need to go forward unless someone has an objection.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Congratulations, John.
Congratulations,
Yeah,
John.
John, congratulations.
Next, I'll open for nominations for the vice president. And I'd like to nominate Bill Spengler for vice president.
Second.
Are there any further nominations?
I'll nominate Don Curley.
Do we have a second? Okay, thank you. All in favor of Bill Spengler for vice president?
Aye.
Aye, also.
Appointment of township secretary. Do you want to discuss this at all, Bob, before we move forward, or?
The township manager suggested he be appointed township secretary. I agree with that, and I'll move the appointment.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, aye.
I was going to say you.
What's that?
The question, the township secretary must be a registered voter?
Yeah, I already checked that.
Okay.
The next item on the agenda is public participation. Is there any public comment?
Yeah, I have one. I know that Commissioner Nagel worked hard this year in 2010 in his capacity as president, so I think he deserves recognition for that and appreciation.
Thank you, Don. And I was also happy that Don, as vice president, we worked closely together, met frequently, and tried to make sure we had doing things the right way. Don's become our parliamentarian, as it were. Well, that's it. Meeting's adjourned.
You guys just switch. Down.
All right.
I got a question. Are we able to start? It's not 7:45?
Yep. Guess we have to wait. No, that was the published time.
All right.
Agenda says 7:45.
All right. Welcome to the January 3rd Board of Commissioners meeting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Board of Commissioners met in executive session on December 6th and December 13th, and also today, January 3rd, to discuss matters of personnel, litigation, and real estate acquisition. We also performed a township manager performance evaluation today, and we provided that evaluation to the manager. We have the minutes of the public meeting of October 11th on our agenda for approval.
Move to be approved.
I'd like to propose one change on page 2, because I don't think the distinction between the fees waived for the Special Olympics and the Willows Cottage are distinguished enough. So what I'd like to propose is after the first sentence under the Willows Cottage, a sentence be inserted that says, "No out-of-pocket fees, including police overtime, will be required to be paid."
Any other amendments?
Move to be approved with that amendment.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We have public participation. If anyone would like to come up tonight and speak on the issues on the agenda, please come up and do so. You also have opportunity to speak on each vote that we take tonight on any amendments to the ordinances or any other activities.
Thank you. Congratulations, by the way.
Please state your name and your address.
Martin Heldring, 305 Audubon Avenue in Wayne. I have a couple of comments and questions. I think they pertain to everything's on the agenda. We've had a lot of conversations about the budget in the last few meetings. One thing I noticed in reviewing it over the holidays is there's no projections other than capital projections. And Bill White and I spoke about this. I think this is on the agenda to be done, but I ran some numbers of my own. And if you just take the percentage increases that you've approved of the past year or 3 years, and just pick whichever one you think is more conservative, by 2020, the deficit in Radnor is $16 million. So I'm just, and that includes flatlining everything other than employees. So I don't think that's where it'll end up. I don't think it can end up there. But I think that's an indication that we ought to be looking at this very carefully, very soon in your administration. Second comment / question, we've talked about these CBFAC recommendations. I thought they were very good. There's 34 of them. I know Bill and the township's working on them. I think that's great. I would hope that this could be something that's a regular agenda item on your board, on your meetings, so that we kind of see what the progress is on these recommendations. I think that's reasonable. And, you know, there's 34 of them. Are they approved? And if they're approved, what's the impact on the budget? And if they're rejected, okay, why were they rejected? And at least we have a conclusion to that. I think that's reasonable. Trash removal, number 3, was on the something that you reviewed as part of your 3 recommendations. This is a very unscientific comment, I will admit, but my sister lives in Upper Arlington in Ohio, very similar community to this one. Their trash collection is $200.
I'm sorry,
a little bit less.
you have to adjust the board.
I have to do
You
what?
keep looking over
Oh,
that
I'm
way.
sorry.
You're just adjusting the board.
Their trash collection is a little bit under $200 a year, privatized. They estimated that the savings to taxpayers was $800. So I don't know if their number's right or the township's number's right, but I did think, at least in what I as a taxpayer saw, there wasn't a lot of information to really determine whether or not it made sense to privatize or not. And that might be a good place to start to figure out if Upper Arlington knows something that Radnor doesn't. Fourth comment or question. Last time I spoke, I recommended committees. There's no finance committee, there's no HR committee, there's no audit committee. During some more dead time on vacation, I noticed in the 2009 audit highlight report, that's 2009, there was a recommendation to have an audit committee. So I don't think there's an audit committee yet. So I ask, is there any reason not to have one? I mean, if I were you guys sitting up there, I would want one, at the very least. I'd also want finance and HR, but audit is one of the recommendations by your own auditors. So I'm going to assume silence is consent on some of these things. Township properties. That was a rather contentious topic at some of the last meetings. So I, again, over dead time and in an effort to get away from some relatives over the holidays, came in and thanks to Bill White, looked at a few files. I'll use one as an example because I only looked at 3 or 4, but they're about the same. 112 Woodland. And I think this is it. Maybe you know better than I do. I can't tell because there's no identification when you go look at the property. I only looked at one, but this is the one I happened to look at. There's no identification. On the documents, it looks like we bought a garage, but then there's this empty lot between this house, which is labeled 112. So do I have it? Does anybody know? That's it? Which part of it is it? It's not the house.
No, the tree is the dividing line right there.
So we bought everything to the left of the tree. Okay. When you look at the file, and this was similar to the 304, there's no HUD statement, there's no environmental, there's no appraisal as to this particular property cost $150,000. There's no appraisal as to how we figured out that this was an appropriate price. There's no identification that it's a park, or I don't know why we bought it. Maybe you remember. I don't know. And in the documentation, when you look at it, you were paid a commission on it. Now, I'm sure there's an explanation for that, but as a taxpayer looking in from the outside, when you go look at a file, I mean, you all own houses, I assume. You have a closing file, which has pictures, HUD documents, surveys, all this kind of stuff. When you look at these files, there's none of that there. And if I were in those documents getting paid a commission, I'd want to make sure all that stuff was there so I could say to everybody, this is how we decided that it was a fair price, and this is how we decided that I should get paid a commission on that. So I'd ask 3 questions. How do we know $150,000 was the right price? How do we deal with this conflict of interest, apparent conflict of interest? And why wouldn't this be a property that we would sell?
Well, number one, I was the broker for the property, so I could not be involved with the township in any way, and I recused myself, and the minutes shows that I stated that at the time, or
Okay.
I did not vote. I did
Okay.
not have a vote.
Okay.
And that they were going to build a 2-unit apartment house there, and that was bought for stormwater management, not as a park or anything. It's just that there was going to be a 2-unit, a twin or 2-unit built there. And up the street, they had torn down a house and they built, and then, but I wasn't involved. Hank Mahoney made those decisions with the Open Space Committee and the commissioners, but
Yeah, just to give you a little more historical perspective on that, Martin. Right up the street on the corner of Woodland and Poplar Avenue, there was an old Queen Anne house, which was very much loved in the neighborhood by the NWPA and others. Developer came in and subdivided that particular property and put up 2 houses, which have eventually blended into the neighborhood. But it was a tremendous loss architecturally for the First Ward. Shortly after that occurred, this house went on the market, and Bill let the Board of Commissioners know that it was on the market.
The house or the side lot?
The house.
The house.
they were
And
sold,
the
they were
house
sold
and the
together. It
lot
was 2
came
separate
together.
parcels.
And it could be sold, as Bill indicated, and turned into a duplex or twins, I think it was, Bill. And Bill did recuse himself right from the very beginning.
Fair enough.
The property was taken to the Open Space Committee. It was vetted there, and the Open Space Committee decided that they wanted to purchase the property for a couple of reasons. One was to prevent this overdevelopment of that particular area. And secondly, there's a little park across the creek from this particular property. And the thought was back then that we could use it for 2 things. One, to connect the 2 parks, perhaps by means of a bridge, to make that little park on Plant Avenue a little bit larger. And secondly, eventually tear down the garage and hopefully ease the banks of that particular property and help with the stormwater problems, which, if you know the area up there,
I do, yeah.
is very, very, very difficult from a stormwater management standpoint. Matter of fact, our manager and I have met with many, many residents along the Gulf Creek, and flooding is always a problem when there's a severe storm. At the time that we purchased the property, we didn't have the money to take the garage down and do the things that we wanted to do. So we said, let's just put it on the back burner for the time being. The family that purchased the house was told, as long as you keep the property up, you can utilize it, but it can go down at any particular time. We can come in and lop off that particular area. So that's the history of it right now. I'm still hopeful that at some point in time we can utilize the property to expand that little park across the way, and also to use it for stormwater management. That's, from my perspective, is what the property is there for. Obviously, I think our board is going to consider
Yeah.
all the CBFAC recommendations with regard to the properties they recommended we sell. We'll do it one by one, and we'll
Yeah.
take their comments and your comments into consideration at that time.
So I just have that it makes sense with one quick question. I mean, I've heard that it was a stormwater prevention issue, but then I also heard it was a development issue. In the documents, the seller is always obligated to indicate if they've had water problems. This property was purchased in 2002 sometime, I forget when. The seller indicated that the only water problems they had in the garage, they didn't indicate anything with regard to the lot, was 1 to 2 inches in 1999. So,
It's not an individual property. Stormwater is a township-wide property, and you can't build on every inch of Radnor.
fair
If you
enough.
wanna- And so
Fair
that's
enough.
why you buy property along the stream bed, because it's beneficial to the people in Willow Avenue that get flooded out 2 blocks down the street. So that's why you do
So
it.
if this was
Yeah,
a-
you probably should come to the next meeting of the Stormwater
Yeah.
Management Group. And when is that supposed to be, Bob?
Next Thursday, the 13th at 7 o'clock, right here in this room.
Right here. It's a real eye-opener to hear people who live along the Gulf Creek talk about.
I live across from, just up the
Trust
road
me,
from,
the
yeah, I know.
Gulf Creek is terrible when
Yeah.
it gets a really bad rainstorm. So if you come to that meeting, you're going to hear stories from people that would curl your hair.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we solve all the problems at once? Obviously, we
No.
can't. So I was really looking towards the future, possibly reducing some impervious surface, preventing the creation of more impervious surface, and perhaps using this as an outlet for some of the stormwater problems. That's really the history.
So I don't want to, there's a lot of people here tonight, but so let me just, one last question then. So if that's really the issue, it sounds like it's property that you really couldn't build on anyway. And how do we determine that 150,000 was a fair price to pay for it?
I frankly don't recall how we determined that. to be honest
Martin,
with
if I may add, you had made a comment that our silence is an indication of our agreement.
You want to indicate not?
No, what we're going to try to do this year is to reduce the amount of dialogue during public comment. We do want all the citizens to come out and speak their piece and tell us what they're thinking, but we don't necessarily want to get into deep comments and discussions.
Fair enough.
Because our meetings go very late. My
know.
goal this year is to keep the meetings, within a few hours and end by 11 if possible.
Fair enough.
But you have raised some very interesting questions. I've taken notes, and I'll certainly make sure that if there's any questions that you had tonight aren't answered, we'll get answers to you if we have.
That'd be
if we
great.
have
I mean,
answers.
I understand exactly what you're saying,
Yeah.
so, but some response at some
And
point
also,
is
some
always
of the
great.
things about stormwater are presented as facts and they're not facts. So, I don't agree that buying this property has had any impact on stormwater. And to your point, no one did an analysis as far as I know. So,
Yeah.
my silence on that doesn't mean that I
Understood.
agree that.
I think it's either one or the other. If it's stormwater prevention, it probably was condemnable property or eminent domain. If it wasn't and we were going to develop it, then, maybe 150,000 is a reasonable price. I don't know, but it's one or the other. I don't think it can be both. So, thanks.
Any further public participation? Seeing none, we'll move on to the committee reports.
Yeah, we're not doing committee reports, we're going to the public hearings. Committee reports will be later.
Okay, well, so I'm going to open up the public hearing for ordinance 2010-23. This is a amendment to Chapter 280, amending Article, I think that's 18, Public Land Use and Public Code. At this time, I'll invite public comment on this amendment. There should be copies of the amendment on the back tables. If you don't have copies, let us know if you have any questions. This was introduced at a prior meeting, and we plan to have a vote on this ordinance amendment later tonight. So any public comment on this ordinance amendment?
I move the public hearing be closed. Oh,
Sarah Pilling, Garrett Hill. I feel like a broken Victrola record. I just want to remind you that this PLU includes our parks. And so I understand why you're passing. I will continue to go to planning to try and urge them to come to an open space designation for the parks. But I feel as if this is leaving our parkland, our open space, more vulnerable than not vulnerable. Thank you.
Please state your name and address also.
Baron Gemmer, 335 South Wayne. A few comments. First off, I do appreciate the fact that it was the November 8th meeting when the meeting date was set. I know, and this actually complied with both all three, the MPC, the home rule charter, as well as our zoning code. So it was characterized that they were in conflict, and we actually satisfied all, and I appreciate John Rice's effort on that. Secondly, I have a question, though, because I brought this up when we were first considering this. I don't see any exceptions or specificity on parking, so I'm assuming that the regular zoning parking would rule. And does that mean in cases like the Township building that all the occupants and uses will have to conform to the zoning parking rules?
That's correct.
That's correct?
Yep.
Okay. One of the reasons I bring that up, too, I think on December 15th, with our proposed tenant or actual tenant, I don't know, had a meeting here, and the whole parking lot was totally full, even during the day, to try and come by. I believe that's all I have then. Thank you.
Hi, Jim Schneller. I live in St. David's, and I have never spoken on this, and I noticed that some very dedicated citizens have had comment, and I hope that their useful, constructive participation would be included a little bit more. And I personally, though, I have a strong issue with the radio and television towers. I don't think we have any business gracing what are, of course, necessary utilities with any more leeway to erect these things. Radnor is prime territory. I think if there's good competition by way of steady ordinances from one township to the other, we won't get stuck with any looming towers. I think that, and once again, this calls attention to the fact that with an open space ordinance in the works, really there should be coordination. And if you could possibly table voting on this, it would be very beneficial. And we tend to be assuaged into thinking that, well, these towers go up. A, we really can't do anything about it. B, they don't look so bad, but they look terrible. And Radnor's got some great escapes. And I object bitterly, and I would assume on behalf of a lot of people, that we're giving open plots to these things. And that includes in semi-populated areas or, inner suburban type areas like in Rosemont.
No. Any tower would have to be improved. We're passing this ordinance because we have a tower right here on our property that's not zoned. So we're doing it for this property. Any other one that would have to be a public hearing on, the commission would have to vote on it.
Well, that is a wonderful aspect. And I think that if we can keep as many avenues narrow as possible, it'd be great. Now, quickly, in number A, do we have to include the federal government? In all seriousness, if we're talking about facilities, buildings, or uses, keeping in mind what Sarah said, and I think she's dead on, is the fact that right now, and what we're doing is setting a precedent. We're setting a large pasture here for really broad usage of some parkland. So we're including the Commonwealth and the federal government. Does that have to be? I'm not an attorney, but I'm wondering if someone investigated that to see if we could leave out the Commonwealth and the federal government.
That's already existing. I mean, all we've done is clarified that in addition to the telecommunication uses that are already existing in this ordinance, we've just clarified the language so it's clear that we're only talking about township, county, state, or federal facilities. That there are other, so you've got those uses already permitted. Neither of those comments, Jim, you've made are new additions We've just clarified what's in the existing ordinance for those two particular uses.
But this could be an opportunity to narrow, and if the federal government has their sights on some parcel in the future, let them, be competitive like the private sector. I've always objected to intergovernment cooperation because really we need the checks and balances. And finally, I have strong concern about the educational aspect where the school administration is an unreined and uncontrollable entity, and I would hope that public education facilities, I know you can't put in approval clauses or anything. However, to limit it perhaps to only schools and not have any kind of buildings, outbuildings, or accessory buildings in general. And that's, of course, number L, the accessory uses. That is immensely broad, and we're leaving room for any number of permutations. It's not late for me to bring this up. This is the hearing on the matter. And I have a great issue with the fact that somehow in our charter, we end up at the hearing speaking to folks who have watched the ordinance grow and feel this stuff is vetted, or if it isn't vetted, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. But please try to table the ordinance tonight. Thank you.
Any further public comment?
Move the public hearing be closed.
So, question, just process-wise. So if I have a question, I wait till later?
We're gonna introduce this ordinance, and you'll have plenty of time to speak on that. Okay, all those in favor of closing the hearing?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, we have a public hearing for ordinance 2010-44. This is the Municipal Utility Alliance, MUA, ordinance. I'll go ahead and open that hearing. Is there any public comment on ordinance 2010-44?
Hearing no one stepping to
Yeah.
the podium, I'll move the hearing be closed.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll move to committee reports, community development. We'll be using the committee assignments from last year until we have a chance to get those assignments made for this year. So Commissioner Curley,
I move the adoption of ordinance 2010-23.
do we have a second?
Second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded.
I have a excuse me, question on item L. 2. Is that consistent with the current lease, more permissive, more restrictive? Is it consistent with the lease that we have?
Kevin, you're referring to the 50% requirement?
Correct. Sorry about that, John, yes.
I don't believe that is in the current lease at all, that particular language. So this clarifies that if you're going to have an accessory use, which is agricultural or agricultural retail, then you have a 50% requirement. And I think you have that currently in your ag district. So we put it.
So this is consistent with what we've done elsewhere?
Yes, it's in your ag district. It wasn't in the PLU. You have some of this occurring on that site, so we transferred it over, and it's consistent with the state requirement.
Okay.
I have a question. We've been having this conversation about the willows and what we're going to do with the willows. And one of the options that's been floating around is a long-term lease to a private organization that would be for profit, not nonprofit. And I just want to make sure that that is covered under this. If that is a direction we go in, is that an accessory catering use? Because we have language elsewhere that says office use has to be nonprofit.
Well, I mean, and I don't know this specifically what we're referring to, but the accessory uses have to be incidental to a permitted use. So you have to start with,
Right, so what is the permitted use that's occurring there now? The enjoyment of the park, it's a park facility.
well, there's an agricultural use occurring there.
I'm talking about the Willows Mansion, not the Willows Cottage.
The Willows Mansion is a public park recreation facility.
Right. So I just want to make sure that if we decide that a for-profit lease would be an option,
I think you're going to have to revisit this ordinance.
we would have to revisit
Yes.
this again.
Right. And that's something that's come up
Yeah.
over the past several months, both for that site and for this building as potential tenants. But you're going to have to revisit that because this was drafted to legitimize what's occurring at
Right.
the various
Now.
parks, the adult education facility, the Willows, and other things that have just occurred over time. And then we added the nonprofit office uses
Right.
mainly for this building. But the for-profit principal uses, we're going to have to revisit this.
Which
going
would just be
forward.
in another amendment process if we decided to go that
Would
route.
be another amendment, but there's 2 or 3 zoning amendments that are in some stages of development, including the student housing. There's some conservation subdivision provisions that are being talked about. There's some other things that I think all the board members have made some suggestions over the last 6 months about zoning amendments.
Okay.
So we would have to wrap that in at the time that you want to move forward. Student housing, I think, is on the Planning Commission agenda tomorrow night. That's the one that's probably most on the front burner.
Okay. And then I had another comment, not a question, about, over the course of the discussion of this ordinance, or this amendment, there have been many, many discussions and comments about protecting the open space in our parks and recreation. Stemming way back from last June, in the Delaware County Planning Commission's recommendation, they came right out and said, we recommend you have an open space zoning classification to protect those parks. And some members of our Planning Commission also voiced some pretty strong opinions that they'd like to see that, and there was a lot of discussion about it. That is not in this ordinance. I don't think it's appropriate at this point to be in this ordinance, but I do think it's something that we should consider and look into. We are updating our open space plan right now, and I am hoping that will end up as a chapter in the plan, an analysis of how effective an open space zoning classification would be and where it would be appropriate in our township, whether it's all the parks, some of the parks, and what the delineations would be. I also want to make the point to everyone who cares deeply about that if we really want to protect our open space, a zoning classification is not permanent protection. It's only as good as four votes on this board, really, and it could be changed any time. If we really wanted to protect permanently the open space in our parks, we'd put easements on them, and that's another way of protecting your open space permanently, even public land. So that is my comment.
Any further commissioner comment? I'll just make a brief comment. I did read through the document. Both the Delaware County Planning Commission and the Radnor Township Planning Commission had a chance to look at these documents. The Delaware County Planning Commission did have recommendations, and it appears that all those recommendations have made it into this document. They've also recommended that we create open space zoning districts. So I'm going to support this tonight because I think I have enough faith in this board that this year we'll probably get those open space zoning classifications created, and we may even have time to visit the easements. I like the idea of easements to protect the open space that we currently have. I certainly don't want to see any cell towers in our open space and in our parks, and I want to protect the value of those parks as they are. So if there's no further commissioner comment, I'll open this up to public comment.
John, One other point I don't think we brought up is that cell towers are also covered elsewhere in our zoning,
That's true.
so that this is not a standalone document when it comes to cell towers.
That's right. Okay, public comment? Please state your name and address.
Chip Layfield, Wayne. In regards to Commissioner Schaefer's comment about a long-term lease at the Willows Mansion, I would really urge this board to be cautious going down that road. I don't think, it's clearly not proper, it may not even be legal, to tie the hands of a future Board of Commissioners that can change. It could be Democrats in charge today, Republicans tomorrow. I think a lease of 2 years is probably the recommended maximum. And the idea of a long-term lease of a public asset like that, I think it would be bad. I think it would be a bad precedent. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Hearing none? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No opposed? Motion carries. Any further report from community development? Done. Okay, finance and audit, Commissioner Higgins.
We have 2 items on the agenda. I'll split them. First item on the agenda is identified as 2010-12E, a list of bills payable. These bills have been approved by the respective department heads and are within the 2010 budgetary limits. The total amount is $46,833.60. Bill, is the Arborway Tree Service in that number, or does it have to be increased by that?
We included it in the total,
Okay.
yes.
So I make the motion to approve this.
Second?
It's moved and seconded. Commissioner comment? Hearing none, public comment. No public comment. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
Second item attached to this item on the agenda is a bill list of 2011-1A, the vast majority of which is electronic funds payment transfers. And Bill, I had a question before I go forward with this. This is being charged to the 2011
That is
budget.
correct.
Is this payroll for days worked in 2011? Since it's identified as January 6th, I wasn't sure whether this actually needs to be split.
Well, in terms of the 2 different sets of books that exist at year end, and the budget operates on a cash basis, so the payroll that is done on January 6th will be for time worked in 2010. However, it's charged to the 11 budget. When we do our financial statements and roll up the accruals, that will be correct. That we'll have correcting journal entries to reflect that. And then obviously the January 20th payroll is for entirely
Okay.
January work.
I got it. All right, so the grand total authorized for disbursement is $1,251,363.52, and these have been approved by the respective department heads, and as discussed, are within the limits of the 2011 budget. So I make the motion to approve.
Second?
It's moved and seconded. Those in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, hold on. Any commissioner comment? None? Any public comment?
I'd just like to clarify a policy. Is any and all attorney fees, are they required to be in these disbursements? I understand that the solicitor is likely to be paid on a different sort of system in the coming year. That sparked my interest as far as there's really been a dearth of attorney fees here. So I'm wondering, are they always in these disbursement schedules? Is there any other avenue?
No, all expenditures must be approved in public by the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
All right. Any further public comment?
Martin Holding again. Just a quick question. This same report that I referenced earlier, the line item right above the recommendation for Audit Committee has a recommendation for an updated conflict of interest policy and a review of the vendor list by the board. And I'm just wondering if that was done and if that's part of this process. And I ask that because I understand that Mr. Spengler recused himself, but from a private sector perspective, looking at that file at 112 Woodland, I would shudder to think what would happen to me if I were in those circumstances in the private sector. It just makes me very uncomfortable. But so anyway, is there an updated conflict of interest policy? I couldn't find one on the website anywhere.
There is a draft I believe the manager has worked on, and we will be looking at that this year, hopefully early on.
And what is this policy today for circumstances where there could be potential conflict?
You have to announce your conflict and recuse yourself
Yeah.
publicly.
Sufficient? Is that
Well,
sufficient?
we're covered by the
policy?
State Ethics Act
Yeah.
as elected officials, and the law is pretty well defined.
Yeah, if
We're
you go
also-
to the minutes of the meeting, you'll see it.
Oh, I'm sure I will.
Yeah.
But I'm really asking because I don't know. Is recusing yourself sufficient?
And I'll refer this to the
Yeah,
solicitor.
you can look at the State Ethics Act. It's online, State Ethics Commission. If there is a conflict because of a pecuniary benefit, whether it's yourself, a business, a relative, you have to recuse yourself.
And that's
Publicly,
That's
yes.
sufficient.
And
Well,
that's what was done.
Yes.
But is that sufficient?
That
Well,
was
since-
sufficient in this case. Yeah.
Okay.
Since then, I will just say that I was involved in property in South Wayne Avenue that the commissioners were discussing a subdivision, and I left the room
Okay.
when there's any discussion of it. And that's
Okay.
what I think should happen if there's a discussion of something you have
Yeah, I
a
think
conflict.
that's a good
Not
idea.
just recuse yourself, but leave the room so you're not present at the debate.
Well, and really papering the file. I mean, an appraisal to justify the price. All those kind of things would be just really standard, I think. In the private sector, you would not only just recuse yourself, you'd say, I won't take the payment or refer to somebody else. I mean, that would be standard.
What's that?
You would not have
I
acted
didn't-
as broker.
I was the broker of record for the property. I didn't have to sell it to the township, but other
No, I
builders wanted to buy
understand.
it.
But once it was
okay?
going, we don't need to debate it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to
Yeah.
do that. That wasn't
Well, I
the point.
disagree, but that's,
okay.
you know.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
The next item on the agenda is adoption of ordinance 2010-44, which we held the public hearing on a few minutes ago. So I'd make the motion to approve that.
Second?
It's moved and seconded. Any commissioner comment?
Yeah, Mr. Zankowski, would you just give us a summary of this in your words?
Commissioner
Very good.
Creel,
Thank you.
I'll take that. Basically, this municipal utility alliance is set up through Pennsylvania League of City Municipalities with Constellation Energy as our broker. It gives us, we go in with 46 or so other municipalities throughout the state to give us purchasing power. As you know, the rate caps come off, effective, basically came off January 1st. You can buy your power from anywhere else in the country. This allows us and allows the administration to go out with the broker to get a quote and purchase the power through the consortium in buying in bulk. It gives us a better buying power as a group as opposed to an individual.
Very good. So this change is largely administrative in order to give us the authority to achieve the outcome that you just identified.
It gives us the authority, first of all, to join the Municipal Utility Alliance, and then along with that, the administration, the ability to use the consultant through the alliance to purchase the power.
Very good.
Any further commissioner comment? Hearing none. Any public comment? Seeing no public comment, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition. Motion carries. Library? Any report? Personnel Administration, I have no report. Parks and Recreation, any report?
No report.
And also Public Health, I have no report. Public Safety, Commissioner Mahoney.
Thank you, John. We have one item on the agenda, and that is a presentation for ALS services for Radnor Township. To put some perspective on this, representatives from Narberth Ambulance came to our public meeting. I believe it was back in early December. We had so many meetings around the end of November and December, they kind of blended into one another. In any event, if I can put it in the vernacular, it was kind of a pitch to stay on to provide ALS services for Radnor Township. At the same time, we understood that the Radnor Fire Company wished to provide the same services to the township, so we thought the fairest thing to do would be to have both groups come out this evening and present each side of the story to us from their own perspectives. And I see we have representatives of Narberth here and representatives of Radnor here. So the way we have it on the agenda is VMSC of Lower Merion and Narberth is to present their proposal first. So would a representative like to address the board? And please identify yourself by name and address, please.
Good evening, David Zaslow, 807 North Winds Drive, Radnor. If I could just ask your indulgence for 1 second to introduce the people that I brought with me to speak with this for this proposal. From right to left, Dr. Jim Rowley, who's the Vice President of Narberth Ambulance, also an emergency room physician at Abington Memorial Hospital, 16 years of service with the company. To his right is John Mick, who's the Deputy Chief of the organization, a career law enforcement officer, firefighter, and EMT. In the middle is Suzanne Smith, who's our Executive Director with a Master's in Public Health and almost 20 years in the public health industry. He's been with the organization for 6 years. Next to her is Patrick Doyle, who is the Deputy Chief and Career Staff Supervisor with 25 years of EMS experience. And next to Patrick is Jim Delaney, who is a captain in our organization, is the dedicated captain to Radnor Township. And Jim has been in EMS over 22 years as well. When I was here on December 6th, you were correct. We did come to the township in order to present our proposal. And just briefly, the background to that proposal was that the township commissioner and Narberth Ambulance met back last spring when the township manager, when the township manager first arrived, and as part of that process, the township manager asked us to provide a proposal for service when everything was on the table after he got caught up to speed with where things stood currently. And you heard that proposal. I'll reiterate it very briefly here. VMSC is asking this board to become the primary ambulance provider, that is both BLS and ALS and transport for Radnor Township. And just very briefly, because there were some questions last time, there is a large distinction between BLS, which is basic life support, and ALS, which is advanced life support. The training that one undertakes to become an EMT, depending on where you go and how fast you want to get it done, takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months. The training to become a paramedic takes almost 2 years, including a year of didactic and then a year of clinical time. There's a large difference in the skill sets between an EMT and a paramedic. Most notably, paramedics are authorized and licensed under their medical directors to give pharmacologic agents to patients in critical emergencies. They can establish IVs. They can do chest decompressions. They can do 12-lead EKG monitoring and a whole host of other things that are not able to be done by basic EMTs. Narberth's been doing this for 66 years now, and we've been your provider for the last 11 years, working hand in hand with the Radnor Fire Company's BLS service. It's come to the point where the Radnor Fire Company has asked to take on the ALS task themselves and to part ways with Narberth in the service that we've been providing. There's a cost attendant to that, and there's some concern that should be realized attendant to that. First of all, our proposal is to provide you with the services that I stated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, at no cost. I repeat that, at no cost to the township. We will provide an ALS ambulance unit that is dedicated to Radnor Township at all times. By way of reference, the cost of such a vehicle would be $160,000 on average. We will provide the medical direction that is state mandated and critical to the performance of any ALS organization, as well as the quality assurance and quality improvement that comes with the medical direction at no cost. In this region, that cost is approximately $40,000 per year with certain medical directors. What we are asking is simply that You provide us with a modest housing arrangement at a central location that optimizes response times. It's something that would have to be figured out, but it could be in this building, or it could be at the Municipal Works building or someplace else, and that you continue to provide the fuel for the ambulance as you do now for the company. In return, the way we will carry the expenses and subsidize ourselves is that when we go on the ambulance calls, we will bill the patients. And we will bill whether it be a commercial insurance carrier, Medicare, Medicaid, or self-payers. And we will collect those funds and pay off our liabilities for carrying the service. And we will not be seeking any subsidy from Radnor Township for providing the service. In addition, we would ask for permission to be able to carry a annual membership drive in the community, which of course is voluntary and tax deductible to people that choose to contribute, and that's another way that we earn income in order to offset the expenses of providing the service. The benefits of VMSC's proposal are very clear. You do not have to increase taxes in order to keep a first-rate, perfected ALS service that's already been functioning in this community for 11 years if you choose to go with VMSC. You do not have to draw from your current tax revenues in order to go with VMSC and to continue the service that you have. You don't have to incur any capital costs with the startup or reorganization of the Radnor Fire Company. You will not incur future capital costs from the ambulance if it's VMSC, and you're likely to incur future liabilities if you go with Radnor, because Radnor is in a startup phase, and there's a lot of costs that are attendant to that, especially in the beginning. You will not make any payments to VMSC, and you would also be able to, if you chose to go with VMSC, save any funds that you had dedicated to the Radnor Fire Company ambulance for its service, because that service either would be not functioning or functioning in a different capacity that would have less expenditure associated with it. That's the summary of the proposal. Last time I was here, there was some discussion about what's the risk, and I think that's an important question, and it's something that has to be addressed head on. VMSC is a state-of-the-art paramedic ambulance service that has perfected the delivery of pre-hospital emergency medicine in this region, and it's recognized as such throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have 66 years of organizational history as an ambulance service, including 30 years of providing advanced life support along the Greater Main Line. And while that may not seem like a long period of time, 30 years, the advent of emergency medicine in the streets, as we know it today, occurred in the early 1980s, and we were one of the leaders in following suit with what was going on around the country, and usually in major urban areas, in becoming an ALS service. So you won't find many organizations out there with 30 years of history of ALS service. Our president, myself, our chief of operations, and our medical director, Ben Usach, combined have a total of over 78 years of experience in the industry. Our operational officers that serve beneath the chief, there's 11 total, have a combined experience total of 200 plus years, with an average of 19 years among them. We have and it's important that you know this and that the community knows this, a very complex medical oversight team, which is led by Ben Usach, MD, who's a board-certified emergency physician at Lankenau Hospital, and also the medical director for emergency medical services in all of Montgomery County. With him, he has a team of 4 other physicians, 3 of whom are emergency room physicians, board-certified at various hospitals in the region, and 1 of whom is a trauma surgeon at the Jefferson University and also out in the new trauma center at Paoli. These doctors are responsible for establishing and reviewing our treatment protocols and for overseeing the quality of the care that's delivered by every single provider at VMSC. And we're able to do this because we're not reliant on a single person or a single ALS coordinator. You heard Radnor Fire Company say that they need to hire an ALS coordinator in order to get this process started. That's true, but that's not where it stops. That's just the beginning. One ALS coordinator cannot formulate an entire ALS program and keep it going in a community of this size and with the needs that are required to provide ALS here. We have a seamless team, a team that's second to none, of these 5 people that serve on a bigger committee called the Clinical Care Committee, which is staffed by not only the physicians, but nurses, experienced paramedics, experienced EMTs. And it's a team approach. In fact, our physicians have a physician responder program where they may go out if they're in the area or if it sounds like it's a serious call and they're available. Our physician responders will respond to your house. You won't find that anywhere else in the Commonwealth, that where somebody else has a team of 5 physicians set up, and you never know, if you call 911, you're going to get an emergency room doctor in your house. That's pretty unique. And there's no organization that can boast of that infrastructure and complexity. VMSC runs over 7,000 calls a year, and we've been at that level for over 15 years now. Radnor Fire Company runs, as I understood President Roderick to say last time, approximately 2,500 calls a year. There's a big difference in those extra 4,500 responses a year in terms of experience. Also, VMSC, if it's approved by Radnor...
Are all those calls in Radnor?
No, that's system-wide.
Okay, so
1,500...
if it's anything like a physician, it's their individual experience. Now, you can accumulate it, but the experience of the person providing the care is what matters, not the aggregate of the organization per se.
Well, correct. Obviously, the person standing over a patient, you're hopeful that that experience level is very high. But in order to get the people and the equipment and the knowledge and the know-how to get these people out the door, it requires a teamwork approach with very experienced people that know what they're doing. Because medicine changes, and the medicine in the street changes dynamically year in and year out. There are new drugs, there are new skills, there are new pieces of equipment that are utilized to save lives. And before it was sort of anecdotal, try this, maybe it works. Now it's all scientific and evidence-based in the medical world. So we have to keep up with all of the advances in modern medicine, because generally everything that they can do the first 20 minutes in an emergency room is what's being done in the back of an ALS ambulance. And we've perfected that, because we have the physicians who are working with us to establish those protocols, to review those protocols, and to train all of our people to that level. I want to make it clear that we are part of your infrastructure and have been so for the past 11 years. And that's what we do when we get involved. We go in full bore, 110% commitment, and we become part of the infrastructure and the fabric of the township and the community. And if VMSC is chosen as your provider, you will realize some more of those things. I guess the perfect example I can give you was back in 1999, Conshohocken and West Conshohocken had a very small fledgling ambulance company, Pleasant Valley Ambulance, that couldn't find its sea legs, and they came to us and said, can we merge with you, and can you provide us the service and teach us what you know and what your organizational history has proven, and establish a first-rate EMS and ALS service here in Conshohocken? And we agreed to do that, and the merger was seamless, and now we have a place on the Emergency Management Committee in Conshohocken. We work hand-in-hand with the police there every day. We train them in first aid and CPR. We provide all the standbys for municipal public events in Conshohocken, and we're in routine contact with township management and officials with respect to our service, anything they need to know about it, and keeping them abreast of all of our activities. That's the same type of thing that we would be doing here in Radnor. It's not just a small approach, it's an entire weaving into your infrastructure and making sure that you're happy with the service, that you know how the service operates, and that the service can be flexible and adopt the changes over time. If you choose to go with Narbeth, the transition will be seamless, because we're just going to do what we always do. And we're going to come out when the bell rings, and we're going to provide the service. And there's no reorganization that needs to be done. We're happy to sit down and have meetings with the appropriate officials, subcommittees, and discuss with them, what the plans would be, exactly where the truck would be, some of that more minutia detail. But what you need to know tonight is that you don't have to take any risks. VMSE can provide the service as we have been doing in Radnor, as we've been doing along the Greater Main Line for 66 years. I guess an analogy that I would give you is if you had a family member who was critically ill and you needed to go to the doctor in order to possibly save this person's life, would you go to the doctor who just graduated from medical school and put his or her diploma up on the wall and has only seen a few patients? Or would you find the most experienced physician in the field who's well regarded in the community and that has knowledge and the know-how and the wherewithal to help your critically ill family member? Everybody can answer that for themselves, but it seems pretty self-evident which direction you should go. If you have any questions for me, I know that there's a lot of concerns about making changes and that there's concern about finances. I am here to address those questions, and I'd be happy to do so at this time.
I have a question for you about how the paramedic hiring works. Does a paramedic have a, Joe Smith? Does he work only for Narberth Ambulance, or does Joe Smith work a few shifts at Narberth, work a few shifts at potentially, the next ambulance corps down the road? I mean, are they interchangeable?
It depends. We have 27 full-time dedicated career staff personnel in our organization who work for us. That's their job, that's their income, that's their livelihood. All right. We also have some part-timers, which are people who fill in as the need arises, that don't work for us full-time, but they work part-time, and those people tend to often work in multiple places. But we have dedicated, we divide our personnel up into platoons, and we have people on dedicated shifts for each platoon, and they put in there anywhere from 40 to 60 hours a week, depending upon the week, and there are employees in our responsibility. Does that answer your question?
So you have 27 paramedics that don't work for anybody else?
I can't stay on their off days. Some people may work part-time. The whole EMS community is like that. It's hard to find paramedics, and they tend to work multiple jobs, but usually they choose an allegiance with one company to be their full-time employer.
Well, I mean, I'm asking because I don't get the impression that if this change did occur, that it would be, first year paramedics coming to, it would be guys and women who have been working as paramedics all over the place, and, they're working more now at Radnor or splitting up their time differently. I don't get the impression that Radnor would hire all brand new paramedics right out of school.
It depends. It depends what their hiring criterion is and how high they want to set the bar. Sometimes it's driven by supply and demand, and you have to take people, when there's a dearth of medics in the community, you have to take people that have a little less experience. We tend to vacillate towards the most experienced providers, and we also try and home grow them where possible under the oversight and tutelage of our medical command team.
Of the 27 people that you have who are full-time, how many of them are ALS certified as opposed to BLS? Is that the proper terminology?
Yes, that's correct. The majority of them are paramedics. We typically, though, staff our ambulances with an EMT and a paramedic.
EMT is ALS, paramedic is?
EMT is BLS, and the paramedic is ALS, just the reverse. And that allows for, if it's a basic call, for the paramedic to drive and not have all the responsibilities. But generally, I would estimate that 60 to 70% of the time the paramedic is in the back, because the nature of the call and with the advent of things we can do requires the paramedic in the back. And for example, 15 years ago, if I was transporting somebody to the hospital that had a broken arm, I would splint their arm, take their vital signs, keep them calm and reassure them, and take them into the emergency room. Well, that's not the state of the art now. The state of the art now is to do everything I just said, but also to start an IV and to give them pain management with narcotic medications so that we can take the edge off the pain, because that's what we should do for people that are in a lot of pain that have fractures. So everything is migrating towards the advanced side of things.
How many people per crew?
We have a minimum of 2, which is state mandated, and we have upwards of 4. It just depends on the time of day, night, and what people's availability are. But a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4 on each truck.
And how many crews do you have operating in any particular, is it 8-hour shifts?
12-hour shift,
Okay.
generally,
How
yes.
many crews are working in a 12-hour shift?
Depending on the shift, whether it's day or night, we will have 2 to 3 crews in the Lower Merion Station. We have a crew in the Conshohocken Station, and we have the currently medic responder located at Bryn Mawr Hospital. If we were your selected provider, we would provide a full ALS crew around the clock at the mutually agreed upon location.
So it's one crew working at a Bryn Mawr Hospital that services Radnor?
Right now, your response is set up that Radnor Fire Company's basic ambulance responds to the calls, and our medic responder in an SUV emergency vehicle meets up and rendezvous with them to provide the advanced level of care.
So Radnor provides the BLS, you provide the ALS presently.
Correct.
It's under your proposal, you would do both BLS and ALS.
Correct.
So Radnor wouldn't be doing any ambulance service anymore.
Well, frankly, that's a great question, and that really is up to Radnor Fire Company. We could envision a scenario where if they wanted to and they wanted to utilize their personnel in that manner, and if the finances permitted, have a situation where they could be a backup to us, so that if our truck's out and another call comes in or it gets busy, they could send their BLS truck out to that call until we're available or until somebody else comes, and they could support us. That happens, a lot around the EMS community, where there's backup and redundancies. So we would have to sit down, they would have to sit down and decide if they wanted to do that if you were to choose us, and we'd be more than willing to sit down at the table with them and figure out exactly how that would work.
And if you did both BLS and ALS, would there still be this system? The way it was described to me was that the BLS went out and then there was a chaser vehicle, and then
No, that's a
it
good
would
question.
just be
You get the one and only ambulance responding with the paramedic on board, and that would be your treatment and transport vehicle.
Okay,
So
thanks.
following up my earlier questions, if you were to get the BLS, ALS entirely, how many crews would be set aside for Radnor?
That's a good question also. We use a system management deployment scenario. You would have one dedicated here in Radnor Township, but depending upon call volumes around the greater area that we service, we float trucks in different directions, trucks that are available so that if one truck's out, we get a truck closer to the region in case there's an ambulance while that truck's tied up. The average truck is tied up 20 to 30 minutes per response.
So you'd be pulling a crew presumably from Lower Merion.
It depends. Like I said, we have float crews that aren't necessarily assigned to any district. If somebody goes out in Conshohocken, they may gravitate towards Western Lower Merion or into Conshohocken, and we'd have to sit down and talk about this, but that's something that we are capable of handling and redesigning to have a float situation here for Radnor as well, yes.
So what is the total geographic area in terms of municipalities that you cover right now?
Right now, we cover Lower Merion, Narberth, Conshohocken, and West Conshohocken as their sole EMS provider, and we are your paramedic service.
And so 5 municipalities?
Correct.
So at a point in time, if you needed overflow coverage, the crew from Radnor could be pulled out into a different municipality, or would you never do that?
Are you talking about Narberth's
Yeah.
crew? All EMS agencies are required to have mutual aid agreements with their surrounding communities. So I can't state that we would never go out, but every once in a while, and it happens right here in Radnor, several times a year, they have to go out and support the other communities if they're very busy. In fact, I think that happened about, I could tell you last year in Radnor, 2010 that just ended, we ran 1,568 calls with our Bryn Mawr responder truck, and 1,301 of them were in Radnor Township proper, so that's about 83%. And if you look back over the past 10 years, that's about the average. About 85% of the calls for service from that vehicle are here in Radnor proper, and the other 15% are mutual aid to Berwyn, Newtown, Paoli, wherever the case may be. Back in the Lower Merion.
And in the event that we opted to go with the Radnor Fire Company because of that state law, if they were at a call and there was a second call that came in, that you would be required to support that?
Depending on its location.
Right.
It just depends where the call is. If the call was in Villanova, that's quite likely. If it's somewhere else that's closer to maybe Marple, Newtown, then that they may be called. It just depends on where the call is.
Who draws paychecks from your organization in addition to, I'm going to use the term paychecks loosely, because I suspect the physicians are consultants and not employees.
They're volunteers.
So they get no pay. Just who gets paid by your organization, a salary or a consulting fee? Just the paramedics, or is there an administrative staff?
Sue Smith is our executive director. She's a full-time career compensated employee. In our front office, we have 4 people that work under Sue in order to cover all the administration of the operation. And that's another important thing. I'm glad you asked that question for me to note. We have a front office or administrative infrastructure set up that's already capable of handling all the residents' and businesses' concerns about EMS service here in Radnor. People can call our office. They will get a fresh, live human being who will be able to answer their questions about their bills, about their membership, about any technical aspects of a response, or any information they need about our service. And that's good to have because we're interacting with the citizens and you're getting answers from the people who know the answers. By contrast, Radnor Fire Company outsources its billing to a private vendor whom they have to pay for that service, and those people may not be as in tune with what's going on at the fire company day in and day out as our front office is at VMSC. So the executive director, to finish out your question, is compensated as well as those front office people, and then just the career staff, employees, paramedics, and EMTs. The board is completely volunteer. The medical directors are completely volunteer.
David, I have a few questions. Presently, I believe we're paying, we're providing a $25,000 per year fee
Correct.
payment to you to cover this service. But I also read that you're operating in a deficit. And
Correct.
You're subsidizing the service to us. Can you explain how you're able to do that? You know,
How we're able to cover the deficit?
well, yeah, you have a fairly, it sounds like a fairly large administrative staff, fairly large administrative budget. We're getting a service. We're subsidizing that service with $25,000 a year. You know, no one can operate in a deficit, so how do you bridge that gap? How are you able to cover that deficit of $125,000 a year?
Right. Well, we haven't been able to, which is what brought us to this point tonight, and neither was Radnor Fire Company. As we said at the last meeting, as I know President Roderick has stood here and said to you, the problem is that there's one pot of recoverable money for the services that are rendered, and both organizations can't bill for the same call. So the one pot of money comes in, it goes to Radnor Fire Company, and then by contract, they pay us an allotted amount depending on the type of call. And the township, a couple of years ago, now chips in $25,000 a year. But in the end of the day, it's not cutting it. It's not covering the cost, and we've been left in this deficit. The only way we can make up the deficit is if we become your service. We have projected that by running the calls and billing for them ourselves, and by conducting a membership drive, we will be able to cover the service and then some without any expense to the township.
Do members of your service get discounted service if they call 911 and they have an ambulance come out? Are they billed the same rate as someone who's not a member?
When you say member, you mean somebody who actually volunteers for their...
Someone who donates money to your institution.
We respond to everything. We're not in a position to decline.
I respect that.
Okay.
I know that. But the question I have is, I remember a long time ago that if you were a member, if you called for an ambulance, in some cases you wouldn't be charged for it because you're a paying member. You're someone who donates money to that organization. And I guess at some point it became a discount, and I'm just asking.
Right.
I don't know.
15%, right? Right. We're required by law to bill the mandatory copays with people's insurance. So we bill insurance, but if you're a member, the benefit that we provide is whatever the balance due is that insurance has not paid, we only seek 15% of that from our members, whereas we seek to recover the entire deficit amount from people who are not members. And that's significant for your tax-deductible donation, because if you have a $1,000 ambulance call and insurance only covers $400, if you're not a member, you're on the hook for the other $600. If you are a member, you're only on the hook for $90 instead of $600. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it very well. Thank you. In addition to that question, we've kind of glossed over this need for you to have a home here and the logistics and the cost of that. It's easy to say that we can just put your vehicle here and create a small office to do so, but we may not be in a position to do that. And the question is, if we don't provide a home for you, would you be able to find a home for yourself?
We're very resourceful as an organization, and we spent the bulk of our 60-some years in Narberth until they decided to go in another direction, which is a long story. But we were able to find our own home and be self-sufficient. The building that we're currently in, which is the medical building at across the street from the back entrance to Bryn Mawr Hospital, is scheduled to be demolished sometime this year. I'm not exactly sure of when that date is, and right now we pay a modest, very modest, under market rent to Mainline Health for the ability to have a parking space there, have a crew quarters, and have some storage space there. So yes, we're resourceful enough to find our own way, but of course there would be an additional expense attendant to that. That would have to be factored in, and they could slightly alter, what we're proposing here, depending on the nature of that expense.
So, how much extra money does this mean to you? Because what I've heard you just say is, if your proposal is accepted, that an expense that you have now, whatever it may be, even though it's modest, goes to zero. You take over all the billing, you make more money from that because the pot doesn't have to be divided among two people, it stays with one.
Correct.
So, how much do you guys expect to clear as a result of this?
I'm not being facetious about it. We expect to break even. And if a membership drive is allowed, maybe a little better than even, but not in any significant amount.
Let me ask a very cynical question then. If all you're doing is expecting to break even, why does this matter so much to you?
Well, it's like I said before, we had a little discussion about that last time. We're not here to make a profit. That's not what our mission is. We're here to provide pre-hospital emergency services. That's what our passion is. That's what we're committed to. So as long as we can cover the expense, we're happy. We're happy with a zero balance.
Why do you think? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Hank.
Any other board comments or
I have
questions?
one last question, and I'm going to ask you this question intentionally, not ask the Radnor Fire Company. Why do you think they want to take it over?
Probably the reason is, and again, I'm not in their minds, and you can get the answer from them, is that they have some people that are now trained as paramedics, and they want to be paramedics, which is understandable. I mean, you don't go to school and all that training and get all excited about having the ability to make an impact on people in life-threatening situations and get a good outcome to just say, well, I got the patch, but I'm not going to use it. So I think
couldn't they go get hired by you guys or get hired by a different ambulance?
When we publicize our hiring when we're hiring. So yes, if we had an opening and it's out there and it's publicized, if one of Radnor Fire Company's paramedics wanted to, they could go through the exact same hiring process as anybody else.
And if they're on, again, I'm being a little bit unfair asking you these questions, but I want your perspective. If they're on call for you, working for you, they have to stay with you if there was a fire call.
Correct.
If they are on call with Radnor Fire Company as a paramedic at that point in time, do they, in your opinion, do they have to stay in the firehouse, or are they able to go on the call, and if a need came up for them to go on an ambulance call, they could go away, or from the fire call?
Every company's different in their rules and regulations regarding what your commitment is when you're on duty. We don't have a combined service like they do, fire and ambulance, so I can't honestly ask that. All I can tell you is when you're in our building and you're on duty, you have to stay committed to that truck, and you can't leave that truck and you can't leave the scene. We have a lot of firefighters that know that, so when they're with us, their fire pager may go off, but they're staying there to make sure that ambulance is covered.
David, I have a few follow-up questions.
Sure.
Do you have any idea of what the fuel usage is for your service? I notice in the operating report that that number is zero, because I assume you're getting the fuel from the township of, I guess, Lower Merion?
No, you.
From us already.
Yes.
Do we have any reporting of that fuel usage?
We estimate right now it's an SUV. So it would be increased if it's a full-sized ambulance. We estimate that to be 2,500 gallons a year at whatever your township fleet price is.
Okay. I guess I had some other questions. You had mentioned this potential need to have a membership drive in the township, and I think I respect the need, but I also see that would cause a lot of dilution of the donations that go to Radnor Firehouse. So the question for me is, if you were to run this membership drive in the township, would that in fact just be taking money out of one coffer and putting in another, and would that cause us to have higher costs on the Radnor side?
I don't think so, and here's why. If you make this decision and you choose VMSE as your EMS provider, it will be incumbent upon this board to let the community know this is what we've done. And we further separated our emergency services. You have a police department, you have a fire department, and you have an ambulance department. And the police are obviously covered with your tax base, but when the fire service comes calling for its annual membership drive, please support it, because we need that fire company. And when the ambulance comes calling for its annual membership drive, please support it, because we need people out there who can save your life if you're dying. And that's a message that the commissioners can get across, and it's one thing that is a great thing that you're able to do.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think that's it.
And,
Okay.
and Radnor Fire Company actually does 2 separate drives on its own. I get in my mailbox both a fire company solicitation and an ambulance drive solicitation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Mr.
time.
Chairman, would it be possible to ask a couple questions?
Certainly, go ahead.
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
first just want to thank VMSC for your service to the community over the years. Just a few questions that came up. When you had started 11 years ago in Radnor, was there a transitional time that took place, or pretty much because of what you were doing, you pretty much hit the ground
It was
running?
pretty much, we hit the ground running.
Okay. When, and I'm not sure, and excuse me for this, medical control, medical command?
Yes.
Currently, how does that operate? Is it run by county? Does it run by, Montgomery County where you're at, or Delaware County? Are there 2 different protocols that are used, or are those separate?
There used to be separate protocols in each county. A couple of years ago, I think it was in 2007, the state finally came out with a statewide protocol so that there was some uniformity in what services are being provided and how they're provided. The medical direction, every squad has to have a medical director. Many are just satisfied to have one doctor who really just signs papers and may not even know his way to the building, to be candid about it. And other services have really invested people, good civic-minded people that really care about this service, and they get involved. That's our experience. We have not 1 but 5 doctors that have their fingerprints all over our organization. And then we have a clinical care committee that meets on a monthly basis, which is comprised of the doctors, nurses, EMTs, and medics, and they're the ones who review all of our policies and procedures as it relates to providing medicine in the streets, and make sure that our providers are doing the right things and does the quality assurance and the quality improvement. It's a very elaborate process that is some of the most sophisticated in the state.
So there's no 2 difference between Montgomery County has one protocol, Delaware has a different? They're
No.
both the same.
So and the only caveat I would say to that is there are optional protocols that the state has promulgated. So for the optional ones, some counties may choose we're going to use that and some may not. But
Okay.
most of it is standardized at this point.
Now, with the BLS and the ALS, right now, Radnor Fire Company has the BLS, and then you respond with your vehicle if there's an ALS. How would that change? Would that still be the coverage there, or would it just be responding down to 1 vehicle that would be responding?
It would be one vehicle, a full-size box ambulance mobile intensive care unit
Okay.
from Narberth.
And then for mutual aid agreements, is that something that would be handled through the township, or would that be something that you would contract to make those mutual aid agreements?
That's a great question, and those mutual aid agreements are already in place. We use them. Radnor Fire Company uses them. We have actually, in anticipation of the potential of you making a decision to engage VMSC full-time, have talked to each one of the neighboring communities, and we have their full support should you choose to VMSC as your provider to continue working with us as they've been doing for many years now.
And final question is, I think you mentioned there's around 1,300 calls you ran in Radnor Township.
1301 in 2010.
1301. For those 1,300 calls, did you run specifically on those? Did Radnor Fire Company assist on those? And the follow-up to that is, if there was a separation, how do you think the working relationship would be between the fire company and your organization?
Good questions. The answer to the first one is that in every call, because in the current configuration, we're not a transport unit. So yes, the Radnor Fire Company came out to every call. We may not have gone out to every call. It depends on how it's dispatched. If it came in as a cut finger, we may not be dispatched to that. But every call that we're on, they're on. And if there was to be a division, I must actually compliment Radnor Fire Company, despite the sensitive nature of what we're talking about, and we understand that, they've conducted themselves with dignity, grace, and composure, which is what we've seen from them the entire 11-year working relationship that we had. So we don't foresee it as a problem, and we're happy to include them, and we'll have to continue to work with them from the fire side of things, of course, and we would hope that they would be anxious to extend the same camaraderie back to us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll hear from
Mr.
the
Chairman, I'm sorry.
Billy,
Could
you
I
have some
follow up?
questions?
I just have three, hopefully, relatively simple questions. I apologize. First of all, you had talked about your break-even analysis based on assumed number of calls, and I'm guessing then an assumed revenue on the rescue billing. What type of contingency analysis is built into there? What happens if the calls don't amount to what you forecasted, if you're forecasting break-even to begin with?
Well, the call volume is generally consistent. It ranges from 2005 through 2010, which is 6 years. The last 6 years, the call volume has vacillated between 1,227 and 1,301 calls. So we can just tell you by institutional experience that the call volume stays the same, and it's never gone down in my 26 years of experience. It's always going up as more housing and residential opportunities, as there's more industry and construction. The call volume just continues to go up exponentially.
What about the flip side on the billing side? There are factors built that are outside of any of our control based on what insurance companies do, what the federal government does with Medicare. How has that been built into your analysis?
Well, we build in to our analysis all of those factors that you just discussed. I mean, every year we have to take a look at what is Medicare doing, what's the Medicare inflation index rate, and what does that mean in terms of our contractual allowance with the government and how much we're going to recover. So, it's a little bit of a moving target, but since we've been doing it so long and we have a team of experts, both in-house and outsourced consultants, we seem to get it right, and overall our organization is extremely healthy and has a lot of financial wherewithal.
Okay, so starting off you're not nervous about starting at break even based on assumed levels of activity?
No.
Okay. The other question is, what will happen to VMSC if Radnor chooses not to continue using your service?
Well, we'll go back and do what we've been doing in the other communities, but we'll have to wind down our operations here. And from time to time, I imagine we would be coming in as mutual aid if Radnor Fire Company is out and it's in the geographic location that calls for us to be the mutual aid responder.
So it's not a going concern question, it's just wanting to provide the service in another community?
Well, that's correct. We're very, very proud of what we do and how we do it. And some of us are a little more vested than others. I'm a township resident. Dr. Rowley's parents live in the township, so there's a little bit of that involved as well. Sure. But overall, this is a first-class township, and we think that this township deserves to have a first-class EMS organization with the knowledge and experience to provide service here.
Sure. That was a financial question. There was
okay.
No other strings attached to that. So thank you. That was all.
You.
Just
to follow up.
I'm sorry. You said 1301, but you're going to be doing a lot more than 1301. What's the total if you take over the whole thing, how many calls are you going to do a year?
We estimate somewhere between 2,200 and 2,500. As it is now, on 6 out of 10 calls, we're going 6 to 7 out of 10 calls. So we're used to going. We would just be picking up that other 20 to 30% of the call volume, or 30 to 40% of the call volume, to be more accurate. Somebody else?
I just wanted to make sure I understood this accurately. So Narberth Ambulance in total in its organization provides 7,000, responds to 7,000 calls per year on average.
Correct.
And 1,300 of those were in Radnor Township.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Any other questions or comments? Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
We'll hear from a representative of Radnor Fire Company at this point. Please identify
Dave
yourself.
Roderick from West Wayne, and if I can get this thing working. Let me start off by wishing you all Happy New Year. Is that coming up? So thank you very much for hearing this so early in the new year. It's important to us. It's an important decision. And I'm going to divide my presentation up into a couple different segments tonight. Background, we're going to talk about the financial implications, the manpower implications. I want to talk to you about how we're going to implement this, and then talk about some of the non-medical things that the Radnor Fire Company contributes to the township. So to dive right in, the Radnor Fire Company was founded in 1906. Everybody knows that. We had our centennial a few years back. The ambulance division was started in 1947 with the purchase of a Packard ambulance. Money was raised by the Wayne Rotary Club and citizens of the town, and that is a picture of it. We have been in this business a long time, 63 years. I think that guy on the stretcher might be a very young Chief Kelly. I'm not sure. He denies it, but... And what I wanted to do, instead of giving you a tedious sort of history of the Radnor Ambulance Division, what I wanted to do is just show you some fun pictures. That little ambulance right there is a 57 Cadillac, and as it goes on, this is a 59 Pontiac. You can see that's the old firehouse with the middle school next to it. This one is my personal favorite. This is a 62. I tried to get the Ghostbusters theme to come up when this slide came up, but I'm not technologically savvy enough. This was our first van ambulance. This is a 73. And I should also note that in the 1970s, that was the first time that demand got to the point where we needed to have a second ambulance on station. The ambulance division runs 2 ambulances. We respond to, as President Zaslow said, about 2,500 calls a year, 2,500, and we have an average of 300 second ambulances calls per year. And that at that point, we hired 2 full-time EMTs to stay on station during the day. There's a picture of them. Those are the 2 ambulances that we started off when we ran dual. That's Johnny and Roy, for those of you who remember that far back. This was taken in the 90s during the Memorial Day Parade. Those are 1990s rigs. And here we are today. And I think it's important to note that the ambulance division runs 2 state-of-the-art, fully equipped Type 3 ambulances. They are stationed right here in Radnor Township. We have 1 ambulance ready to go. We have 3 full-time crew members. There's no floating ambulances. They're right here. When we need a second ambulance call, which we respond to, 2 of them today, roughly 1 a day, that ambulance and that crew is right here in the township. So we have 5 full-time paid staff, we have part-time staff, and 39 volunteers, run on average 22 to 2,500. In addition, we have a QRS, and I know we're very fond of our acronyms. We have a quick response service vehicle that can start patient treatment while awaiting transport if both ambulances are dispatched. That's the vehicle on the right. Also, on the fire side, it should be noted that our rescue truck, which goes out on, obviously, motor vehicle accidents, cardiac arrest, that type of thing, is also a certified QRS vehicle. That vehicle can show up, do patient stabilization. All our fire trucks have AEDs, and most of our volunteer firefighters, of course, all our ambulance personnel, but most of our volunteer firefighters are CPR and AED certified. So what I wanted to do at the last meeting, and we covered some of this today, it's kind of interesting, was take you through what a typical ALS call looks like, what a typical 911 dispatch looks like, and look at it from the point of view of ALS. So a resident experiences a medical emergency and dials 911. That call is routed to the Delaware County Emergency Services Center in Middletown. That emergency service dispatcher guides the caller through a series of questions, and it determines what resources should be dispatched. So based on the protocols established by the county, it is either a basic life support call, so it would be our ambulance and 2 EMTs, and an ALS call if it's an ALS call. So as President Zaslow mentioned, if it's a cut finger, a fall, a sick person, BLS ambulance is going to be dispatched without ALS. If it's a cardiac arrest or something like that, advanced life support intervention necessary, the chase car shows up from Bryn Mawr Hospital provided by VMSC. It's important to note that Radnor Ambulance responds to every single call. We have responded to every single medical emergency in the township for 63 years. The BLS crew shows up and performs initial patient assessment and stabilization. The paramedic, because he is a higher level of medically, will assume patient care upon his arrival, or he'll initiate patient care if he's first on scene. The Radnor crew packages the patient for transport, secures him in the ambulance. The Radnor crew transports the patient and the paramedic to the destination medical facility. We then return the paramedic to his vehicle. We both return to our separate places and we write patient care reports individually. Radnor Fire Company bills for the ALS call, and then we pay VMSC for that service. Now, what we do is, I just threw the fire division call volume in here. The ambulance, the Radnor ambulance was dispatched. These are the latest dispatch numbers. And then we have, the ambulance division billable calls are less than that, about 70%. We run about 300 second calls a year. And then the billable ALS calls are considerably less than the ones you can get dispatched quite often, but a lot of times we don't require advanced life support. So billable calls are roughly probably 50% of the billable calls and probably 40% of the actual dispatches. So I just want to finish up the background part of this by kind of doing the Mythbuster thing. We are not getting into the ambulance division. This is not something new to us. We don't want to play ambulance. We have been providing this very important service for 63 years. We respond to every medical emergency. We start initial patient assessment and stabilization. We transport the patient. We perform the billing function, and that's very important because we don't have to go around and ask anybody for licenses, much like they don't. We can bill already. We do all the billing. The fire company is integrating an already existing service, albeit an important one. I don't want to minimize what we're doing here, but we are integrating a service that already exists. So let's talk about some of the financial implications. So I got to take a minute and give you a little bit of a primer in ambulance billing here. When we do all the billing for all the emergency medical services in the township. For an ALS call, we bill $1,100. For a BLS call, we bill $750. We are permitted to bill loaded mileage. We assume, and I'm assuming in this particular calculation, that we're going to have 3 loaded miles per call. So our average total invoice is going to be $1,145 for ALS and $795 for BLS. Now, this slide is not as complicated as it looks like. These are the zero balance claims for fiscal year 2009. Our fiscal year extended into 2010, so this is reasonably recent data. For Medicare, if you see up there, we had 311 zero balance claims for ALS Medicare calls, 245 for Medicare BLS calls. We get reimbursed. We can bill what we want. We get reimbursed from the government of the United States on average from our billing company. This data is from our billing company. On average, we get reimbursed $454 for an ALS Medicare call. And as you can see, that's over half our ALS volume. We get reimbursed $385.99 for a BLS call. The average difference on a Medicare call is $68. So when ALS gets involved on a Medicare call, we receive reimbursement of $68 incrementally. Workers' comp, it's $82.
Dave, can I ask you how much? And if I'm understanding this accurately, of that $68.51, I assume you are paying more than that.
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. And so for commercial, the difference is $350. We assume self-pay is the same as commercial. So the average weighted difference is about $199. So our incremental revenue for a full year, and this is just purely an extrapolation, is $159,000. Now here's the problem. For an ALS 1 call, we pay Narberth contractually, and I'm not blaming Narberth for this. This is simply what's written in the contract. We pay them, for that $68 reimbursement, we pay them $393 for an ALS 1 call and $420 for an ALS 2 call. Slightly different level of care. So for every single call under the current contract, no matter who's reimbursing us, it's worst with Medicare, but even on commercial and self-pay, we are losing money. So if you take the incremental revenue of $159,000, we paid to Narberth, VMSC, $313,447. That's our estimate for the fiscal year, the end of fiscal year 2009. That's actually not an estimate. So we estimate that we lost $153,000 on that contract. And again, I'm not blaming them. They're providing a service. They're asking to be paid. But to underline the point yet again, there is not enough money for both services to do well economically. That simply can't happen. All right, so why is this important and what's the solution? Well, this is our income statement from the ambulance division. We get some government support. That top line is mostly grants. We get some federal and state grants. They're not very big. We get, cookie sales, bake sales, just little bits and bobs, T-shirt sales. Our main source of revenue is billing. This is where we make our money. We bill, much like President Zaslow was talking about, we bill insurance companies for our services. We also do a fund drive. He called it a membership drive. We do solicit the township members. All right. So we have an administrative staff. We make payments to VMSC. And what you can see there, when we signed the Unified Billing Agreement, before all we were billing for was Medicare. When we started billing for everything in 2008, our payments to VMSC rose dramatically. And as you can see, our net ordinary income dropped dramatically. We got down to the point we were making money. We would like to return to profitability. We are not doing this to break even. We're not on the ambulance division. Why is this important? Well, if you carry over the ambulance division income and losses to this sheet right here, the next thing we want to look at is what is the fire division doing? The fire division makes money one way, and that's from public support. We can't bill for fire calls. It's expensive to run even a volunteer fire department. Fire division operational expenses are laid out there, as you can see, and they generate a loss. It's not their fault. They can't bill for their services. It is a township-provided service. We provide it. So what we want to do is, from a combined point of view, we are an integrated emergency response unit. From a combined point of view, what we want to do is we want to make a little money or break even on the combined entity. So our ambulance division is an important source of revenue. We don't have to come back to you and ask for subsidies to the fire side because we want to generate income on the ambulance side. We would like to get back to profitability so that we can eliminate that loss, as you see in the bottom right-hand corner. How do we do that? Well, again, what I did here is I took the forecast for 2010. We do a lot of forecasting and budgeting at the fire company. I took our forecast for 2010 and I said, okay, how's this going to look without ALS? And basically what I did is I assumed that government support was the same. I extrapolated our public service revenue. I kept the public support the same. I left some of these numbers the same. And what I did is I added in compensation benefits of hiring a full-time paramedic staff. That's 5.3 people to cover you 24/7, 365. And as you can see, we're not going to get back to the heydays because the Medicare mix is probably moving against us. We're not going to get back to the heydays, but we generate enough income that we can now subsidize a very substantial part of the fire division losses. That's our bogey. We want to make up that $35,000. We're not coming to the township and asking for that. That burden is going to be on us. If we want to reduce some of these expenses, that's something that we'll be looking at internally. But as you can see, a very important part of the funding, any money that you take out, the fire company is a zero-sum game. Any money that you take out of one part, you're going to have to make it up somewhere else. The fire division doesn't generate revenue.
Excuse me, Dave, did you run the numbers for 2010 if you made the payments to Narberth?
I did not, no.
What would the bottom line be?
It would be considerably less. I figured that we're going to make, I figured that it costs us somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 on that contract. That's the loss that I projected.
So the loss could be anywhere from 135 to 185?
Yeah, could be quite large, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You wouldn't necessarily be running BLS right?
No, this is integrated. This is BLS and ALS.
No, but I'm saying to Hank's point, if you ran the numbers with the Narberth taking over, you'd also reduce some expenses because we would no longer be responsible for BLS.
Right, but keep in mind, that's something, I'm glad you brought that up. That's something in mind. The ambulance division has never come to the township and asked for money, ever. We buy our own ambulances. We bill for service. The ambulance division has never, that's sort of a myth, the ambulance division has never come to the township and asked for money. We've asked for capital purchases for fire trucks, but never for an ambulance. We buy our own ambulances. We buy our own chief vehicle. We buy a lot of our own stuff. The only thing that we've ever come to the township for, any of the big items, is simply capital purchases, and we're going to talk about that in a minute.
These losses, how do you cover these losses each year?
Well, it's just these losses here. I mean, the fire division we've only had to cover one really bad year of loss, and that's 2009. And when we started to see that, that's when we said, hey, guys, we need to bring this in. So it's not as though we've been losing tons of money all along. Integrated, we're okay. Split apart, that loss is going to have to be made up by somewhere, read taxes.
And what's program service revenue made out of, 900,000? Where's that come from?
That's billing. That's our billing
that's your
revenue.
billing,
That's
okay.
our insurance revenue.
Okay.
David, two items. Line item administration, line item chairman. Are those incremental out-of-pocket expenses, or is that an allocation?
No, well, a little of both, to be honest. The administration is split. We have some administrative costs. Those are professional fees, that type of thing. We do have a full-time administrator, somebody that they can call if they've got a billing question, much like Narberth. And then the chairman stuff is basically what happens is we have a chairman of the ambulance division, and those are programs that he's trying to initiate. For example, one of the things that our chairman is very passionate about is the bike team, because we run a lot of events in the township where there are large crowds where an ambulance can't get in. So what we do is we've got a bike team. Some of the money's in there for that, for example. So these are programs that he's designed, and we actually fund those.
Do you have a sense of how much of that is incremental versus how much is allocation?
I don't.
Okay.
So what I did here, and again, this was something that I wanted to do for my own peace of mind as a financial person, I took the 2010 forecast and I did a 10-year projection. And I'm sorry this is difficult to read for those in the audience, but essentially the object here was to say, okay, how is this going to look over the course of 10 years? What kind of financial impact is this going to have? Is this, I mean, it makes sense from a combined point of view. We've got to subsidize the fire division, but just standalone, is this a good investment? Is this a good investment if we're going to invest in this as a standalone project? So I forecasted it out for 10 years. I assume that the revenue is going to go up by 1%. I've done it on 0.5%. I've done it on 0% increase. I assume that we're going to get a 2% increase in public participation. Then I assume that our expenses are going to go up by 3%. So our administration goes up by 3%. Our salaries go up by 3%. Vehicle maintenance goes up by 3%. And I forecast out our income statement. I then say, okay, let's turn this into a cash flow statement. I add back depreciation. I throw in the ambulance purchases, as you can see, 200 and 250 going out, because again, the township has never, ever subsidized the ambulances. And there's our initial investment. So I say, okay, I want to discount this cash flow stream over the next 10 years, and I used a discount rate between the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year Treasury, which is sort of a classic discount rate. And our net present value of this cash flow is positive to the tune of $167,000, which shows that it's a good investment, just a standalone investment. And for the really hardcore financial types, I even calculated an internal rate of return. That's 21%. Of course, internal rate of return is when the net present value goes to zero. What would the discount rate be? 21%. A lot of major corporations use 20% as a hurdle rate. So aside from the fact that it subsidizes the non-revenue-producing fire side, it's a sound investment just standalone. Let's talk about where the money's going to come from. One of the things that I wanted to show with this, one of the first presentations I ever made in front of this board was to talk about the ladder truck. And when we came and asked for the ladder truck, the original number was $800,000. And when you're having tough times in a budget point of view, looking at an $800,000 expenditure is tough. Buying a $500,000 fire truck is tough. So what we did is we said, okay, maybe what we should do is we should look at a 10-year plan. We should smooth out these purchases, and we're going to subsidize this to the tune of 200. The original number I think was 225, I was 224, something like that. Anyway, in the budget it's 220 or it's 200. And we said, okay, we're going to smooth that out. And it's in this year's budget, 2011. What we are going to choose to do, we're going to get our 200,000 capital purchase in 2011. We're getting that anyway. We're going to choose to spend that on ALS. We're not coming to you and saying, okay, we want you to fund our capital purchases, and oh yeah, by the way, ALS is going to be on top of that. We're going to choose to use the money that you've already allocated to us and spend it on ALS. Now, what does that do to our cash flow? So next year in 2012, we're going to buy what's called a tactical piece. It's slightly less expensive than an attack pumper, so it's a little bit less, but it drops our cumulative cash flow from a large capital point of view down to a negative 125. We will fund that. We will figure out a way to we will get low interest state loans, probably is the way we'll do it, and we will purchase that. Then we'll get our 2013 subsidy, we'll be positive again. Then we're scheduled to replace another big fire truck in 2014. We drop 2.25 down. We'll borrow that. Then we'll make it back up. If we didn't fund ALS, those would all be positive. We'd never have to borrow a nickel. But we are happy to do it simply because it makes us profitable again. It allows us to fund the fire side. It keeps the money in the fire company and keeps it in the township. But it doesn't cost the township anything over and above than what you were going to spend anyway.
Can I ask you, Dave, the capital expenditures? You have 2 trucks now, 2 ambulances now.
2 ambulances now, yep.
You're planning on spending $225 startup. Is that include another truck?
No,
or?
that's going to include, basically that includes things like for example, the monitors. What President Zaslow talked about, it being a high-level medical care. The monitors, for example, are very expensive.
So upgrades of what we currently have.
We're going to upgrade. We're going to be buying a lot of new equipment. There's also, I put in there, some of the startup costs. We are going to have to hire an ALS coordinator, and we're going to have to pay him to start building this program. We're going to have to hire and bring on board and make sure that they go through an orientation program. We're going to have to hire our paramedics. I want to run dual provider for a month with NARBIS so that these guys are overlapping. I want this to be absolutely seamless. That's built in there. Now, are we going to?
Are you absorbing those costs, Dave?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The fire company would absorb.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and you had mentioned 5.3 paramedics. That's how many paramedics?
Well, the 5.3 is what that is if you're going to hire a full-time employee, anytime you do that, you're going to have to hire him. You're going to have to hire 4 because you have 24/7, 365. You have vacation time, sick leave, all that kind of stuff. It comes to, well, you can argue between 4.7 and 5.3 people to cover somebody full-time.
And those paramedics, can you address, I mean, maybe you're doing that next. Okay, go ahead.
I will answer your previous question from a half an hour ago. Big time. All right, so what I wanted to do here is spend a little bit of time talking about the manpower analysis. And I don't want to camp out here. I'm making some assumptions. I would certainly be open to changing some of these assumptions. But based on the data from the last time I did this, probably about a month ago when I did this analysis, there are 53 total active members on the board in the fire company. We've got some probational members coming in, but there are 14 fire-only members. That means all they do is run fire. We have 21 ambulance-only members. All they do is respond to ambulance calls. Fortunately, we have 18 people that do both. So we have a total active membership of 53. So what that means is availability for fire calls, or the 14 fire-only members plus the dual members, come to 32. Now there is a baseline membership. And what that means essentially is if the average member is required to respond to 25% of the fire calls. So if you have 30 guys or 32 guys available to do that, the bottom line is if 25% of them do what they're supposed to do, and they invariably do, you can put 2 trucks on the road anytime you need to. And we've been very successful at that. If you take the ambulance division away, if the ambulance division were to leave the township, what happens at that point is you're going to obviously lose the 21 ambulance-only members. And I'm making the assumption, and let me just be very clear, this is my assumption. We could change this any way you want, but I'm going to assume you're going to lose.
Is there any logic to that assumption?
Pardon me?
Is there any logic to that 50% assumption?
No. It's just a pure, it's not like anybody's going to be mad and we're picking up our ball and going home. It's simply that probably there are people that are very passionate about emergency services, and they like doing both. They like running ambulance. They like responding to fire. And if they can't do it here, they're going to do it somewhere where they can. Again, maybe we won't lose any members. Maybe we'll lose them all. I don't know.
If they, since it's, usually these folks have to live near the firehouse in general. Who, if they left here to fulfill that personal need to do it elsewhere, who offers that opportunity to them?
Just for example, right up the street. Yeah, no problem. So anyway, what would happen? And again, I'm not suggesting, these are assumptions. I can't make it more clear than that. So available for fire responses without the ambulance would be 23. That puts you 7 below the baseline. Again, an assumption. Now, if you're going to hire, at that point, if you're going to put 2 fire trucks on the street, you're at a 30% response rate. I'm being actually a little bit more optimistic. You're going to have to hire 2 full-time equivalent guys. And if you just take it, I didn't even do the 4.7 or 5.3. I just said, okay, let's just assume each firefighter costs 70 grand by the time you roll up all the benefits and everything else. You got to hire 4 of them. It's going to cost you $280,000 for 1 full-time equivalent employee, 24/7, 365. If you have 2 of them, you're talking $500,000. So not only would you have to replace the ambulance income, but it's very likely, and again, I don't know these, I would be happy to discuss any assumptions you want to make, but it's very likely you'd be looking at hiring full-time firefighters, and they are very, very expensive. However you do this analysis, you're going to be measuring the impact in hundreds of thousands of dollars. So our implementation proposal. All right, the first thing that we have to do, David Zaslow is absolutely correct. A person that is absolutely critical, required by law in all medical services, is a medical director. Obviously, they provide the medical director. If they're not part of the equation, we're going to have to hire our own. We're very pleased to
Can I ask a clarifying question? 'Cause maybe, David, your medical director is hired or a volunteer? Volunteer. And your medical director would be a paid employee?
We pay Narberth money for their medical director. So if he's not seeing it, that's news to us. He might be volunteering for them, but we're paying for that in our bill to Narberth.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, you need a mic. You can't speak from the audience. People at home can't hear you.
The medical director at Narberth Ambulance, who's covering all of the communities, is a volunteer. Part of the contract between VMSC and Radnor Fire Company for them to have the medical direction that we provide is a $10,000 a year price tag for that. It's an extra service because they could get that in the marketplace elsewhere.
So what we've done is we've hired Edward Dickinson. Now, for people that are in emergency services, this is a nationally recognized doctor. This is a guy that, quote unquote, wrote the book on pre-hospital medicine. This is a top quality guy. He is a physician at the emergency department at the University of Pennsylvania. He teaches on the University of Pennsylvania faculty. He's the current medical director for Malvern and was instrumental in bringing ALS into Malvern. He's the medical director for Berwyn and was instrumental in implementing that. He actually permitted me to...
Dave, can I just ask a clarifying question? I want to make sure I got terminology right. You're going to enter into a consulting agreement, not quote-unquote hire as an employee, right?
Now, just to make sure that all the details are absolutely perfectly clear here, we will actually pay the University of Pennsylvania a fee for them to do the administration of the liability, which apparently they require for people that work for them. But then we are going to 1099 him.
Okay, and how much is he getting paid?
He is going to get paid $10,000.
So the same 10?
The same thing, yep. And we'll pay the University of Pennsylvania some money for that, and then we'll 1099 him. This is his resume. Medical director for Haverford Township, Berwyn, Malvern. This man has a lot of experience. He's been a paramedic. He's done all the jobs. He was actually, if you look down here, he was actually Narberth's medical director for a couple of years. So he knows the system. These are some of his volunteer commitments. At the bottom, there's some of the honors that he's gotten. This man is more than qualified to guide us through this effort. So let's talk about how we're going to do this. Yes, indeed, we are going to hire an ALS coordinator, but he's not going to be working alone. He's going to be working under the direction of this very experienced physician, Dr. Dickinson. We're going to be looking for someone with previous implementation experience. He's going to work with Dr. Dickinson to establish this structure, and we are going to do nothing but hire top quality, experienced paramedics. We are not going to be standing around a paramedic school begging for somebody to come and work for us. We are going to hire top quality, experienced, veteran paramedics. We are going to integrate them into our already existing structure.
Paramedics that you anticipate hiring, are they people who are currently volunteers at the fire company, or are they folks that would be employed by other
They
companies?
are, well, a little of both. If you look down there, we actually, under the note of hiring paramedics, Kevin, you'll notice that we actually have 3 paramedics on staff. We have 2 volunteer paramedics, they're paramedic level or higher, actually. But we will be, I mean, we already probably have 20 resumes in. We have people that, I mean, we're a good organization to work for. The people that work for us now like working for us. We take care of our people.
The paramedics that are on staff now, are they employed elsewhere as paramedics?
They are employed elsewhere as paramedics. They run basic life support for us. They do not do ALS skills while they're here. So what we're going to do at this point as well is we're going to form an implementation committee, ALS implementation committee, the AIC. We're going to have members from the ambulance division, the fire division, and our board of directors. We're going to invite other people from surrounding companies who have done this. For example, Berwyn, we're going to invite them in because, you know, they've made mistakes. We can avoid their mistakes. We have already hired our medical director. We are, at this point, inviting township staff to participate if they would like to. We would be very happy to have them participate in this. And then we want to set an implementation schedule. We want to interview some candidates, review the equipment purchases that we discussed, and then perform some venue selection. We're not entirely sure we want to base this person at the fire company. Chief Kelly is actually looking at different people that we might actually house the paramedic in the evening, for example, on the eastern side of the township. We want to make sure that we are absolutely responsible about our response times. The paramedic is based at Bryn Mawr Hospital. That can be very convenient sometimes. When we get a call over in Garrett Hill, for example, it's nice that the paramedic can get there first because he's closer. We don't want to throw away that advantage. We are looking very seriously at potentially trying to negotiate something where we could keep a paramedic or an ambulance based over there. Keep in mind, we have 2 ambulances. When we hire a paramedic, we will be able to staff during the day 2 ambulances that will be in the township. So let me talk about some of the non-medical call-related activities. And again, this is sort of the soft side of this. All the people that you see sitting back here, they live, work, or have gone to school in the township, okay? It's important to them. This is what they do. They volunteer their time to do this. This is outside of running calls. We oversee our AED program. This is what we do for the school district. We've sort of divided it up into categories. We provide training and equipment and support at significant savings using our buying power for the elementary, middle, and high school and administration. We train their staff. I'm a CPR instructor. I've actually helped train I did a middle school and a high school class. We monitor all the AED battery and expiration dates, the pads. We oversee the monthly maintenance. This one, the football standbys. This is an important thing. When you talk about community, I mean, the whole Friday night lights. What we do is we provide football standbys for the Radnor High School and Archbishop Carroll. We don't charge for that. There's no charge for that. Those standbys are completely free. We don't use our primary ambulance for that. We have a second ambulance that is staffed by volunteers. A lot of them went to school at the high school. They're happy to sit down there on Friday night, and they do it for no charge. We go to the annual Radnor LM Lower Marion Parade and Bonfire. Then for the Parks and Recs, we do ambulance and bike team support for the Fall Festival. Same thing for the Radnor Run. We cover all the summer concert series. We do the Katie Sampson Lacrosse Festival. We provide bike support along the Radnor Trail. For the Wayne Business Association, we do the Jazz Festival. EMS support, we do the annual tree lighting, North Wayne Santa Parade. We do the scholarship run. The list goes on and on. I didn't even we do CERT training for the police department. Township residents, we do community CPR and first aid programs. We have an open house. We have EMS week. We invite people in because we're based right here in the center of Wayne. Boy Scouts, we have a program going on right now where we teach them first aid and they get their CPR merit badges. We do the Township Memorial Day Parade. We support the Garrett Hill 4th of July Parade. And again, these are all things that are outside of running calls. This is all done by volunteers. So all I can tell you is that the Radnor Fire Company is integrated into the community. It's not like the president lives. I do live in the township, but everybody you see back there lives or works in the township. We're all here. This is our community. We care. We're here. We're doing this because we care about the community. We live here. So unless you have any questions, that concludes my proposal. I would request you support us in our desire to bring
I'll
this in.
ask you the inverse of what I asked the prior person.
Pardon me?
Why do you think it's so important for them to keep this business?
I think that well, I'd hate to get into that, Kevin. I have a lot of opinions.
I'd like your
on
opinion.
that.
I honestly, I mean, this is a very difficult decision. With, I think, significant ramifications. And I'm only asking the question
Yeah,
to
I
help
understand.
formulate my opinion.
I can only tell you, my opinion would be simply that they allocate a lot of overhead to our contract. And when you pull that contract away, that overhead's going to have to go somewhere. And while I don't think they've been around for a long time, and they will continue to be around for a long time, they are a great organization. We've had nothing but a great working relationship with them. I have nothing but positive things to say about it. But it simply is not sustainable. So I think they want it. When they show they're generating a big loss, I think some of that is overhead allocation from other areas that's being applied to our contract.
Dave, I'm sorry.
That's my speculation.
Dave, if you follow the implementation plan, let's say February 1st, this board makes a decision that you have it, not Narberth. What's the time frame for implementation? What's that 2-month overlap, and when are you guys up and running on your own?
Well, that's a great question. What we're hoping to do, actually, I was hoping to be completely honest about it, I was hoping to get your authorization tonight. We'd like to move forward. I'd like to start we have Dr. Dickinson in place, ready to go, assuming that you approve this. I'd like to put the ad in the paper for the AL, or put it on the internet for the ALS coordinator as soon as possible. We would like to get started. We want to hire him in February. In February, we want to start advertising for paramedics. We want to start getting people in and start doing the orientation. We want to start purchasing these things. I think what our goal is to be up and running, at least have the structure in place by May, run dual with them June, July, and then the end of the contract is July 31st. But we're actually hoping to get your approval tonight.
Thank you.
Dave, tell me, the way I understood it, the ambulance division is going to make money that's going to go back into the fire department?
Correct.
Can you tell me how much that is on a
Our
annual
estimate was
basis?
$107,000.
And our startup costs on this would be $225,000?
That is correct, yeah.
So, just using one of the ways to determine the return, this is a slightly 2-year return.
I didn't put the payback time, but it's 2
Yes.
years roughly.
Very good. And then would you qualitatively, in a sentence or two, describe your comfort level with Radnor performing ALS service? Just summarize.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information, but
Well, the way I can do that is best by saying, look, we provide the structure in which emergency medical services are provided to the township already. We are adding a level of care. It is an important level of care. I do not want to minimize it. With the hiring of Dr. Dickinson and an ALS coordinator, we are going to hire experienced people who have done this before. This is going to be from a clinical patient care point of view. This is going to be invisible to the township residents. The only thing that's going to change is the patch on the side of their
so
arm.
very comfortable. You are very comfortable
Absolutely.
with this from
Yes.
a technical perspective as
Absolutely, yeah.
the president of our fire company.
Absolutely, very much so. Yep.
It's also going to change. Radnor would be doing BLS and ALS, so
That is
we're going to eliminate this whole chaser vehicle
Correct,
thing.
yeah. Well, let me just address that because there's some important issues there. There are several different models for providing ambulance service. What Narberth is providing is a perfectly legitimate model, and what that is called a MICU, a mobile intensive care unit. You put an EMT and a paramedic on one unit and you send that out. We might do that during the day. We would actually be able to staff 2 of them. What's going to happen then in the evening is it's very important that we maintain our volunteer base. We have volunteer EMTs, people that are willing to give their time. What we might do, we don't want to chase any of them off the ambulance. What we might do is run chase car. We have that ability at night from a separate location with the idea that we want our volunteer EMTs who are completely qualified, most of them are nationally registered EMTs, to continue performing the great service that they've been performing, again, for 60 years. We don't want to chase them away. So what we might do, and again, those decisions have to be made, but what we might do is do the chase car. Keep in mind, Elaine, when you do chase car, you don't tie up your paramedic on a basic life support call. If you send out a MICU on a basic life support call, and now you get an advanced life support second call, your medic's committed on that call. It's going to be very tough for him to get off that call. At that point, you're going to have to pull in mutual aid. So chase car makes sense. It's not a completely far-flung idea.
So Dave, if you're making $100,000 more a year on this, does that mean downstream we would be able to share in some of that and reduce our contribution or not?
Well, keep in mind, Kevin, that what it does is, if you look back historically, okay, we've actually made a bit more than that in the ambulance division. Under the current payer mix, it's unlikely we'll be able to return to those days. All I can tell you is that we have used that income to subsidize the fire division up to now. So it's not as though there's going to be more money. It's not as though, oh, now we're going to start making more money. We're simply returning to profitability. We've always been profitable. With this contract, we became unprofitable. We simply want to return to profitability. We can't sustain that for very long. We sustained it for about 1.5 years, but we can't do it anymore. The reason that we don't come to the township for every nickel and dime thing is because the ambulance division had some income.
Dave, can we get a copy of the net present value calculations that you did? That's very important to me.
Sure. I'd be happy to take you through that.
I haven't seen that in a little while, but I appreciate that.
That was just for the real financial.
No, I appreciate you doing all that work. That's a lot of transparency, and it's very helpful to see, long-term. For me, it's a long-term decision, so seeing all that data is very helpful.
I think it'd be helpful for the township staff to take a look at those numbers and do some crunching and tell us what your recommendation is, unless you've already done it.
Yeah, we can look at that information.
Dave, another area that I've had some conversations with folks to the west of here, and what do you see as the plus or minus as far as the relationship you have with them? And I know you're going almost to, not a fire district, but at least a emergency response coordinated effort between us and the western suburbs.
Well, Berwyn has been nothing. I assume you're talking about Berwyn. Berwyn has been nothing but supportive of this. They're completely, so in fact, what we're hoping to do is on our implementation committee, we're actually hoping to have some of their ambulance officers on our implementation committee. They're that encouraged by what we're doing, because we're going to be able to provide that to the Panhandle as well. Currently, right now, they've got to run, or Narbert does it, but they would have to cover that area from an advanced life support without Narbert. So they're delighted to have us doing that.
And I assume that BLS for the Panhandle, if you went away, would be affected.
Right. We're doing that. That would have to, another arrangement would have to be made. That would be a pretty long response time.
Any further questions from the commissioners? Guess that's it on the presentation.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Maybe just a couple questions if I can.
Sure, from staff would be great. Thank you.
Dave, just on the calls that come in and how they're routed, where do the calls go for ALS? Do they go to Narberth or do they go to?
The calls for all 911 calls are routed to the Township Emergency Dispatcher.
Okay, so they're routed through Radnor Fire Company. You'd also mentioned too, in regards to the calls that Radnor Fire Company does to transport, does the Narberth person, the paramedic, ride with the squad to the hospital? Okay, so they do ride with her. It's not
absolutely.
where they separate
we
from
transport everybody to the hospital. Yeah. Typically, we'll have 2 EMTs show up. One of them will drive the ambulance. If the paramedic's okay, great. If it's, the paramedic will ride by himself. If it's a really hard call, there's a lot of patient care to do. The EMT will stay and assist the paramedic in the back. Typically what we do, if we can free the guy up, we'll bring their car back with us. No, I think we're not allowed to do that anymore, but we'll bring them back. So we have 2 guys with us all the time.
Okay, but on the ALS call, the paramedic does ride.
Paramedic,
go
absolutely.
to the hospital.
Yeah.
All those times, okay. And then same question is on medical command. I know you talk about medical director. Is there a hospital that has medical command on this, or is the medical director control how the care is given at that particular time?
The medical director is the one responsible ultimately for patient care. Paramedics operate under the license of their medical director. We're on his license. We're able to practice through his license. So medical directors can be based at a hospital. Medical directors for example, Dr. Dickinson is. But they don't necessarily have to be.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, walk me through the process for a second here, because they have 4, you're proposing 1.
What?
Medical director.
Yeah, well, the whole 4 medical directors, they might have 4 physicians associated with the
Right.
organization, but there's 1 medical
Okay.
director.
Does the paramedic ever have to, during the call, ever have to reach out?
Absolutely.
Or is it more driven by policy?
No, you will, well, what happens is each individual place will have a medical director, but you
Right.
will also have an emergency, you'll have a command physician at a hospital. So let's say, for example, that we roll up on a bad call, and the paramedic has a question. You are that physician's eyes and ears in the field.
So who does that paramedic reach at? Dr. Dickinson? And what if Dr. Dickinson is not
If
available?
Dr. Dickinson happened to be working at that hospital at the time, but what he'll typically do is call the destination hospital and talk to a command
Okay.
physician there.
I see. So basically, you make the call. You say, "I've got this person. We're bringing them to Bryn Mawr. This is
Correct.
what I'm saying. Please let me talk to a physician
Exactly.
in the emergent." They don't have to be associated.
No.
Okay.
So Dave, is that like a trauma center physician or
It
emergency
depends
room
on whether it's a
physician?
medical call or a trauma call. If it's a trauma call, and we're going to take them to Paoli, they're now a trauma center, we would call ahead and we would talk to a trauma doc.
Okay. One
Some of
other
it's
thing-
covered by protocol, some of it's
I
not.
forgot to ask, so presently, you're also handling all the billing.
Correct.
Will there be a savings in the fact that those payments will not have to be calculated and transferred to an outside provider?
You know,
Is
John,
there
that's
any
a good
benefit
question.
to
I've
that?
not analyzed that savings. I suppose we could go back to our billing company and renegotiate that contract. But currently, they're doing it right now, and they're the ones that tell us what we owe VMSC.
Okay.
And we found that it's cost-effective to do that outside. Billing is a ridiculously complicated thing, and if they can do it internally, that's great. We personally subsidize it out to experts, and we feel it's very cost-effective.
How much do they take off the top?
I'm not sure. Does anybody have a quick guess on that? I would guess a couple of percent probably would be my guess. Yeah, 2 or 3% would have been my guess as well.
And are they responsible for chasing down non-pay? Who chases down non-payers?
The billing company chases down non-payers for the first couple of months, and then we turn it over to a collection company. They're separate from our billing company.
Okay.
Any other questions from staff? Bob, Bill?
Some of the questions that I have based on looking at the detail are very detailed, and I'm not sure it's appropriate to bore everyone with those kind of questions in terms of differences in the call numbers in the presentation. So if we're going to go back and relook at this, I'll get those questions.
Some of those are
addressed.
differences between dispatches and billable calls.
Okay.
That's going to be the primary difference in the call volume.
Okay, very good.
I don't know about the rest of the board, but I would like to have staff take a look at your numbers as opposed to Narberth's numbers, because what we wanted to do was to get a side-by-side comparison, both the financial picture, the operational side of things. I think we've gotten a lot of that, but I, for one, would like to get some feedback from staff after they've looked into the picture. And I understand perfectly how you'd like a decision. I'm sure Dave would as well. But I think we owe it to ourselves and everybody here to analyze this thing properly and come to a correct decision. So I would ask staff to take a look at this if the rest of the commissioners are in agreement, and we'll make a decision at the next meeting.
I agree. The other thing I would, if the recommendation is to go with the Radnor Fire Company, I'd like to understand a contingency plan if it doesn't play out, as hoped for.
Is that the way you'd like to proceed?
Sure, because I think too, is we'd like to be able to sit down with both organizations, because I think there's some questions that, just on the operational side, that tonight has raised a few questions too as well. So what we'd like to do is have the opportunity to sit down with both groups
And
and go through a few
I assume
questions.
both sides will sit down when Mr. Zinkowski and Mr. White are available to answer any questions so that they have a full picture to give us the proper feedback. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Great.
That's fine. May I have an opportunity to clarify 1 or 2 points?
Sure, come on up.
Sure.
Yep.
In no particular order, I just wanted to mention, because it is important, and we are a volunteer-based organization, that if we were to assume the full service, we would allow the volunteers of Radnor Fire Company to run ambulance calls on the ambulance division, because it would be the Radnor Ambulance Division just being run by a different group. So that opportunity to volunteer in your hometown on an ambulance squad would still exist, and they could still run fire calls as well. So they're not losing that opportunity. I have nothing but good things to say about Dr. Dickinson, personal friend, as Dave stated, was previously a medical director at Narberth and is renowned as Dave said he is. But the difference is Dr. Dickinson's a very, very busy man. He's spread very thin amongst many organizations and all of his professional obligations to the University of Pennsylvania. And that's what the enhancement of our service, having 5 physicians who are actually members of the organization, who actually go on the ambulance calls and go out into people's homes, that's unique. That's different. You're not going to find that anywhere else. And if one guy's busy on vacation, work, whatever, there's redundant backups in place, and that's something significant to point out. Also, I'm not challenging what President Roderick said about the fire company's ability to get two ambulances out, but our experience has been that it's a hit or miss proposition, and I'm not saying that for our second ambulance it wouldn't be that way until we figured out how to shore that up, but it's not as if Radnor Fire Company gets their second ambulance out every single time without without any issues. That's why the mutual aid is in place. And addressing this issue about the TE task force that you brought up last time, we've been in touch with JD over at the task force. He understands what's going on and has committed that if the township goes in VMSC's direction, be happy to cooperate and work with us. And as I said before, we've contacted every surrounding municipality and their services here, and they're willing to work with VMSC, as they're already doing, just in an increased capacity. And one other comment, President Roderick said that Narberth is maybe allocating too much overhead to the Radnor division. That's not accurate. We allocate 10% of our actual dollars and cents where we know the actual dollars and cents, but where we have to guesstimate it or break something that's just a whole apart into 3, for the 3 divisions we have, we allocate 10% of our expense to Radnor, which is the least amount of overhead that we allocate to any part of our organization. So, and one other point, Radnor Fire Company does not bill itself. I think that was just made clear here. They use a billing agency, right? And we are experts in billing. We electronically bill Medicare, Medicaid every day. We know what we're doing. We have no problem integrating the Radnor billing into our current system, which provides people, as I alluded to earlier, the opportunity to call our business office and get direct answers rather than going through an outside agency, and we don't have to pay for that service. And whether it's 2-3%, I believe it's a little more. It's money that's going out the door rather than being done in-house if you have that capability. That's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out that I think that both of you gentlemen have handled yourselves with a great deal of civility and respect for each other, and I think it's greatly appreciated by this board, because it is a very sensitive issue for the two of you and as well as the board and the community. So thank you for your presentations.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the discussion on ALS services for Radnor Township. Public comment?
Hi, I'm Susan Silverberg. I live at 219 Sugartown Road here in the township, and I'm glad that both of the bidders are still here. 2 years ago, I had a very serious medical emergency, and I called the Radnor ambulance. I wanted to go to Lankenau Hospital because all of my doctors were there, and one in particular that I would have liked to have had access to. Had I been able to use the Narberth service, would they have taken me to Lankenau, because the Radnor ambulance promised a family member that they were taking me there? I ended up at the other end at Paoli, and that family member was obviously very upset, and fortunately Lankenau called and found out exactly where I was. But I'm wondering if Chief Roderick and Mr. Zaslow could address that question. Thanks.
Thank you. Would you both like to address that? Seems immediate.
Our policy and protocol in terms of the destination of choice is that it is the patient's choice so long as they're medically stable and the medic in charge feels that it will not be a detriment to the patient's condition to take them to bypass one hospital and go to a further hospital. There are certain calls that require specialty resources where people may be taken by land or air downtown, depending on the circumstances, and that's really the provider or medical command's choice. But yes, Narberth will generally transport you to your destination of choice, absent some medical emergency that would not permit that or would not be safe to do so.
Thank you.
That is our policy as well. We'll try to transport you where you want to go, where your medical records are. Our ambulance division chief just reminded me, he remembers that call, and unfortunately at that time for that medical emergency, Lankenau was on total divert. An emergency room can actually say we can't handle, they can declare a state of high patient volume. They can't actually say you can't bring anybody there, but what they try to strongly do is they say, look, we are crammed to the rafters. Please don't bring us any more people. At that point, we try to respect that, and we did take this lady to Paoli. So I'm sorry that caused an inconvenience, but we're working within the system as it's created.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Public Works, Commissioner Spengler.
You want to just, I don't know, take 2 minutes and let the folks leave, or do they want to hang out, or?
You're all free to go home if you'd like. Thanks again for coming out. We appreciate it. All right, Bill.
All right, what we have here is for authorization to approve emergency streetlight replacement. We had 3 streetlights knocked down. The insurance companies are going to pay us for this, but it's important that they go up right away. It's recommended by everyone that we do it on an emergency basis. The locations or costs are listed on the sheet, and I would move the authorization.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any further commissioner comment? But first, Bill Hagan is here. I'd like to hear from Bill. He's been nice enough to hang out all night for this one item.
The reason it's gone through the emergency is it's the actual locations of these lights. 2 of the lights are within 100 yards of each other. Down at it's not really 5 points; it's 6 points. You got Conestoga, Glenbrook, County Line, Thomas, Old Lancaster, and I'm not sure the other road that goes into Lower Merion. A lot of heavy pedestrian traffic down there. 2 lights within 100 yards of each other. I feel that it's an area that needs to be illuminated, and we needed to get the ball rolling right away. The second location is at Airedale and Lancaster, and I'm going to say within the last 12 to 14 months, we had a pedestrian fatal down there at this intersection. And this is a light that also needs to go up, and we needed to get the process rolling as soon as possible.
Okay, any commissioner comment? Seeing none, any public comment?
Mr. Chairman?
Staff comment?
If I may, I'd just like to commend Bill Hagan, in taking the initiative here, that knowing that, given our criteria of approvals, that, because of the safety issue, also speaking with AJ, with the police department too, to make sure that, this is something that is justified, not just trying to get this replaced, that there was a basis and foundation behind this, and just want to thank Bill for, taking the initiative and his efforts on behalf of the public safety to do this.
Okay, I agree. Thanks, Bill, for hanging out tonight. I did see the polls down. I wondered what happened. A whole bunch of polls down last week. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, the motion carries.
Okay, Bill, thank you for the snow removable job, and you're working on the last of the leaves? How are we doing on that?
We probably got another day left on leaves. We're hitting piles now. So anybody that has leaves in front of their house should see them disappear in the next day or so. As far as the snow removal, I'll pass the accolades on to the guys that were in.
Okay, any old business? Any new business?
Yeah, I have one item. I think we should move, on one of the CB FAC items, I think we should move quickly, and that's the one regarding the spirit of the referendum to borrow money to purchase more open space. So I don't believe that, sort of different than the CB FAC recommendation, I don't believe that we should reverse that, but I think what we should do is test whether that moral authority is still there, because if we're going to make a purchase, we're relying on that moral authority to make the purchase, and I'm not sure that it's there. So I would like to motion that we direct staff and the solicitor to prepare referendum alternatives to evaluate the willingness to maintain the spirit of the previous referendum to borrow money to purchase open space.
Are you talking about a survey? What are you talking about?
Talking about staff putting this on our agenda, probably for next time, and having staff say this is what this could be the language in a referendum, and this would be the impact of that language. And the idea is to see if the moral authority to borrow money to purchase open space is still there.
So another voter
I'm opposed to Lane,
referendum?
but I'm not going to discuss it unless he gets a second.
Well, that's the whole point, yeah.
Well, I'll give him a second. I think I'm not opposed to testing it. I think the referendum was approved in a different economic climate. If it got approved, if that was the route we went and it got approved in the current economic climate, I think you can assure yourself with the utmost of confidence that you have a plurality of the township in terms of anybody voting for it, that you can go forward. I think it's worth at least investigating, and I'd like to, one element of it is, what's the cost of running a referendum?
Yeah, that's sort of it. That's sort of the information that I want, and what the alternatives are and what the implications could be. I mean, I don't even know if could it perhaps extend the time that the existing referendum, the authority that provides. So it's not my intent to stop this or to stop anything. It's simply to evaluate whether the moral authority is still there and what alternatives we have to test that moral authority.
You're talking about a voter referendum, not just a professional survey.
Yes. But I'm not saying that we vote on that referendum, certainly not tonight or even next time, but that staff has to do some work to provide what those alternatives would be and what the impact of those alternatives would be. So that's what I want the board to decide to direct staff to do.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes.
I believe the question that, Don, you might be asking would be a public opinion poll, and I don't think that's a legal question that you can ask of the voters of shall we move forward or not. The question probably would come down to is shall the issue be repealed or not? I think that would be the appropriate question, because I don't think you
So
can ask
that's what I want
a
to
yes
know.
or
Like,
no.
That's sort of the nature of whether that has to be the wording, or like sort of how we test whether that moral authority is still there.
And I believe, and I'll give you the chapter and verse from the Unit Debt Act, but I think when the voters approve a borrowing incurrence of debt, you can go back to them and ask them to unapprove that. So it's a referendum to unapprove what's been approved by the voters already. That's my recollection from the
Can you
from the
ask,
Unit Debt Act.
John, just out of curiosity, look, maybe I don't want to take up a ton of time. Could you ask the question differently? Because the connotation of unapproved bugs me a little bit. I mean, could you?
Well, that's my
okay.
phraseology. That's not,
okay.
the act doesn't say that, but.
Okay, because that was my question. Could you ask the question in a more positive manner, saying, you know, can we extend the term for another 3 years, 5 years, et cetera?
I think
I don't need an answer
The
to
unit debt authorization is 10 years, is my, you know, when you have a voter-approved debt question, it's 10 years to spend that money. I don't think there's a...
we ask the question again, we essentially have to ask for another 10 years.
I believe so, but let me look at that. I mean, if the board authorizes me to do that, I'll look at that. But that's Sounds like what Don's talking about.
Yes, that sounds like what I'm,
Let me understand something. What you're asking for is to put up before the voters a referendum to undo the $20 million authorization that was approved by referendum a number of years back?
I don't mean to parse words, but I don't believe that's what I'm asking, because I'm not sure that we have to undo it. It might be we want to extend it. Like, that's the sort of thing. It might be that perhaps we only can undo it. I don't know. I want our solicitor and our staff to advise us what our options are. What I want is to know if that moral authority still exists, and I want them to advise us on how we find that moral authority.
Why wouldn't we just do a survey? I mean, a professional public opinion survey, that would give you
I
the
think a
same.
survey and an actual referendum are
Well, why don't we just decide whether we're still in favor of that? I mean, if the majority board is still in favor, let's not spend a lot of time. Okay, I'm still in favor of the bond issue. The voters approved it. We've been very fortunate. The economic times, we didn't have to move forward. But sometime we have to move forward, and the public gave us the ability to do that. And I'm confident with that.
What's the window right now?
2016.
I believe it's 10 years from whenever the
So it was
voter.
approved in 2006.
Right.
It is good until 2016
Right.
by 80% of the voters. Okay.
So let's address it in 2015.
Yeah, I think Don's asking a fair question. You know, is you got the authorization to do this in a very favorable economic climate, but we haven't pulled the trigger. And the economic climate now is very different from when this was approved, and I think it would make sense to try to figure a way just to make sure that the sentiment of the community is there to actually move forward with this. I suspect it is, but I think if you get the authority now in these economic conditions, you can be fairly well assured that in the lifetime of most of us sitting here, that we're not likely to see economic conditions that look like the last couple of years for a while. I hope not anyway.
And one thing that we might want to do is, and I don't know if this is an option, this is what I want staff and the solicitor to evaluate. Perhaps we issue another referendum and we get 10 more years. And so instead of being under the gun in 2015, we have in 10 more years to make.
But the difference is, Don, I never needed a referendum. Okay? I'm in favor of this without a referendum. The only reason we did the referendum is to get public support, but also when the public approves it, it doesn't account against how much bonds you can issue. Okay? If you get electoral approval, it doesn't count against what you can issue under the laws of the state of Pennsylvania. So that's why the main reason we did it was to get that, number one, to get approval that people for open space, but I don't have a problem. I got a call when this first came out from Invery. I went up to Invery and met with the executive board of Invery. And they were concerned that we were going to do away with this, and they're very concerned about that piece of ground and not seeing a load of houses built there. They want to keep it as open space. So they're supportive of this. So the people I represent are supportive of this. I don't have to go back. I'm going to be running next year. I'll answer this question next year, door to door with everyone. And I can tell you, the overwhelming majority of people in my ward are going to support me because they support that. And they always have. So I don't need a referendum. Do you support this? Are you willing to pay for this? They are. Okay? And I'm going to have to make the decision when that comes, to vote for that. But I don't need a referendum.
Let me just remind you that the process, if we ever did decide there was a parcel or a use for this money that we wanted to take advantage of that electoral debt, is a public process. I mean, there's a hearing, there's an ordinance that needs to be passed, and if this township has suddenly changed its mind about open space, we would hear that at that point. It's not going to be done behind closed doors. It's going to be it would be a very public process, which you will hear from your constituents if they're not in support of it.
So I'll just throw a couple thoughts in there. I see John Rice looking over also. Actually, the acquisition of property can be discussed and arranged in executive session. However, it isn't official until the board votes in public. And that's quite opposite of most of the other activities we do. So normally we bring something to the public, we have a full discussion in public about it. The commissioners get a chance to talk about the issue, the public gets a chance to weigh in on the issues, and then we vote. Well, in the acquisition of real estate, it may actually go a little bit differently. We may reach some terms in executive session with the seller, and then we must vote in public to expend that money, to spend that money. But what's lost in that is that opportunity for the public to weigh in heavily about that issue. So what I'll be interested in is the process. I respect Commissioner Curley's idea of going to referendum again. However, the idea of extending this to beyond 2016 doesn't seem to be an important issue to me right now because we're only in 2011. So what I'd be interested in is a way to find out, to get a good pulse from the public on this issue to see if they in fact do support it. I don't think a survey is the way to do it. There may be a way for us to do it in a public meeting and just have a long discussion about it and give the public a chance to come in and comment about it. I think we'll probably see that there's some division in the township where there was at one point a lot of support for something. There may be some division, but there still may be more people in favor of it than those opposed to it. For me personally, I've mentioned this before, that I'm opposed to any new debt. We already have a lot of debt on the books, but I'm also in favor of preserving land. So I have a little bit of a paradox for myself because I want to preserve land, but I don't want to go into any more debt. So I don't know how I would vote on such a thing, but I'd like to hear from the public. So what I would suggest is that we get this onto an agenda at some point as we're getting close to this idea of purchasing land, and give the public a chance to talk before we make a discussion in private, in executive session, and make a deal with a seller. So that's how I feel about it. I don't know if any other commissioner has any thought on that, but that's the way I feel about
I'm not opposed to the concept, John. I think we just ought to test in some manner that the support is still as strong as it was, or there's sufficient support.
Well, we're going to have the best test next year. We got 4 commissioners running for election. So the voters ought to ask them, are you going to vote for this bond issue? And if they don't like it, then vote against them. It's very simple. We're going to have a referendum next year. 4 commissioners are running.
Except for the fact that what if both commissioners in that election take the same position?
Pardon me?
What if both commissioners in that election take the same position on the issue?
Well, then it's not a problem. We'll know what the position is. Whoever gets elected will know where they stand, right?
I had folks in my ward contact me after the CB fact report came out, and the only issue they wanted to talk about was this, and they were still strongly in favor of open space acquisition. So,
You'll find people, John, who are in favor and who are opposed. I think
right?
we just,
That's right.
We need to test
There
the
were
pulses.
80% in favor the last time, 20% opposed.
We just need to test the pulse, in my opinion, to a certain, whether a referendum is the right
Seems
way.
like an unnecessary expense.
I'm not saying a referendum. I think John's concept is fair. Let's do it through a discussion as opposed to a referendum. But
Well, why don't we do it for a discussion when we have a property to buy and we're thinking about doing the bond issue, and the voters can come out and we could decide whether we want to do it or not.
I mean,
we
I
have
believe
a
that-
motion on the table.
Yeah, and
And we still have to allow public comment, but if you want to withdraw the motion, I'm fine with that. But we have to give the public a chance to comment on this
Okay.
as well.
But I just want, if you mind if I address Bill's, I believe that what John said is that the way this can happen is we can get pretty far down a process. And we're relying on the moral authority from this referendum to get that pretty far down a process. And I'm not sure that's appropriate, so.
But I don't need the moral authority. I'm an elected official. I can make that decision without
Very good.
a referendum, you know? In California, they want to referendum everything. I'm willing to stand up and say where I stand on an issue and not just put my finger in the wind and say, uh-oh, what's the public thinking? Uh-oh, they're against this. Because the public could be against it and I could still be for it. We would never got the trail if we just went with the wind.
Well, we have differing opinions of how to do this, and I don't think we're going to solve those right now.
But no, the issue is the staff shouldn't be spending money, time on it.
Well,
That's the
we
issue.
haven't voted yet, so we have a motion on the table. I'd like to have some public comment now, unless the commissioner has further comment.
Susan Stern, Newtown Square. I actually really appreciate Commissioner Curley and Commissioner Higgins' thought. I actually agree with every single one of you completely. I think it is a good idea to, I wouldn't necessarily call it the moral authority, but test the wins and see if the support is still there, so that if you had to make a vote, you could feel confident that the voters behind you, that this is something the residents want. And yet I think the most cost-effective way to do it is exactly Commissioner Fisher's idea, is some point some point this year, put it on the agenda as a conversation and ask the public to come out and just share their thoughts on where they stand, so that you don't go to the expense, to agree with Mr. Spengler, of having staff do a bunch of work of referendum work, and all that would be expensive to do. But I also think that it's not a good idea to go down a path in executive session and have staff work on appraisals and do all the staff work that would be involved in potentially pursuing a real estate purchase, to then find out in a public meeting that the township does no longer support it. And maybe they do and maybe they don't. And I'm very torn as well. I value open space. I have a lot of it right near me. And I'm nervous about the concept of the township incurring further debt. And I'm a person who voted for the referendum. I think I would still weigh in. I think I would. I do still really support it. I really respect, Mr. Spengler, your willingness to take a stand. And not be a finger in the wind. I get that. I really do. I appreciate it. But this is a really big decision, and I think it does warrant, in the best inexpensive way that you can do it, which is to have a public meeting at some point, to have the public weigh in so that you have a sense of us, is probably a wise course of action, because we have a much better understanding right now of our financial position than we did 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I'm not sure the township as a whole would. I'm torn, and I really value open space. So I would appreciate Mr. Fisher's idea the most. And I think it'd be the least expensive way to test those wins. Thank you.
Chip Layfield, Wayne. I think all the commissioners' opinions are equally valid and legitimate, and I voted for the referendum, and I support it as well. I think, if I'm hearing Commissioner Curley correct, what I'm hearing different now is the idea of a moral argument. And I think everyone's aware of how financially the world has changed. But I think there's another component as well. When we were asked to vote on this, the word Ardrossan, protecting Ardrossan farm, wasn't even mentioned in the referendum anywhere. And now it's my understanding that as we look to preserving that property that Bill's fought to do for so many years, we're talking at 80, 90% of that money being spent in one ward on one acquisition. I don't think the voters supported that. And I come at that as a moral question. Is that something that the voters want to do? Is that how they want to spend their money? And I don't know the answer, but I think no matter what your side is on this issue, it makes sense to go to the voters and ask their opinion. And as far as the cost, I don't really think there is a cost if you do it at a regularly scheduled election. There is a big cost if you do a special election, but otherwise I don't believe there is a cost. I think it makes sense.
Any further public comment on this motion? All right, seeing none, those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
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 All right, motion fails.
What was the vote, 5-2? That said, it would be wise, in my opinion, to proceed the way you've directed me.
Yeah, and I will ask that we do look at this. I will probably put something on the agenda if the staff can help with this in a few weeks.
Well, why are we putting it on the agenda?
Well, just a discussion.
No, because we're going to have a discussion about a landowner's property, okay? In a public meeting.
No, not about the land, no, about the concept of borrowing money to purchase land.
I mean, if it were me, I would
We
just
will
like
not discuss
to
the
see it
landowners.
at a dedicated meeting or.
No,
or
I don't want to
something
see it at a dedicated, I don't want to have a big.
Subcommittee, you don't have to go to a subcommittee meeting.
All right, do it at
It can be on
subcommittee.
a subcommittee, like,
Good.
it just, the forum doesn't have to be here, but there should be a forum.
Bill, I respect where you're coming from. I really think we owe it to the voters to just give them a chance to talk about
John,
it.
aren't you going to talk to every voter in your ward if you run for re-election this year?
I will, but you probably won't like what they're going to say.
What's that?
Because if it were up to my ward, they would probably say no. But I think it's important that all the voters can come out, hopefully not all at once, but come out and give us their opinion. And maybe it won't, maybe the opinion will be the same that we already know, that they voted for this in 2006, and they'll affirm that. I'm betting that's what will happen. I'm not using this as a tool to sabotage the acquisition of land. I just want to have some confirmation that the public really does want this now.
Could we just do it at an open space meeting, make that, I mean, there's going to be one, and then anyone who wants to come out and...
Open space meetings are not public meetings. Because
Well,
you're
it could be
discussing-
public, but
Could do
honestly,
it.
I mean, I hear your concern and your questioning. I think it's a waste of time. I don't feel that same sort of, yeah, I'm sure there is less support. I'm sure it's not 80% right now, but let me point out that a year and a half ago, I ran for office things looked even more dire then than they do now. Our budget looked like we were never going to climb out from under at that point. And I ran on this issue, protecting open space, and I won by 65%. So I feel very confident that even though we're in an economically challenging time, this is still a top priority for people. And
why then are you afraid to have the discussion?
I'm not afraid. I think it's a
Free to
waste of
have a
time.
discussion.
Why wait?
We have a lot
I'm
of
going to have the
things to
discussion
do.
all year, door to door. I'm going to have a discussion with every voter in my ward this year about this, like I have 4 years ago, 4 years before that, and 4 years before that, and 4 years before that.
Mr. Chairman,
We've had the discussion.
if I may, just as a suggestion, the possibility, I think Commissioner Schaefer mentioned a survey. And I know some people have differences of opinions if they're valid or not. But my past experience has shown that a survey has been very good to get a pulse of the community, not only on this issue, but a multitude of issues. What are the priorities? And I know that coming to meetings and that, I'm sure that you can probably stack the deck in the room here and fill the room up with one side or fill the room up with the other side. Not that it would happen here, but I'm sure that you could do that both ways. But I think to get a survey, and I know sometimes the public is afraid to kind of say something to a commissioner or to someone like myself or a township representative.
Not the public
where,
I know.
Where they may not tell you that, you know what, this is a priority for me, that police and fire protection is a priority to me. The rest of these things aren't priority. Open space is a priority. If the board would like, I can get a firm that I've been familiar with in the past that has given some tremendous feedback. That is, the accuracy has been very, very good, to speak to the board about the potential of doing a survey and the benefits, not only on this issue, but a multitude of issues across the township of really where are the priorities that the public really sees us to go, in which direction do we need to go. So if the board would like, I mean, I can bring a firm here to kind of, you can talk to, and they can say, here's the benefits, here's the minuses. At the end of the day, you say, you know what, thank you very much. It hasn't cost the township a penny to be able to do that, but at least to be able to have this kind of conversation without, having the deck stacked one way or the other, to where I'm sure this room can be filled,
I think it
one
makes
way or
sense,
not,
Bob,
and be skewed.
to do that with a firm that can generate
Sure.
a scientific survey.
So if the board would
We
like,
did
I can actually
a
have
small survey a few years ago about resident satisfaction, and I think the results were a little disappointing for some longstanding commissioners, because I thought the satisfaction was higher than the results generated. So I think it's worth looking at and testing the sentiment across a number of issues, as you described. It really shouldn't necessarily be confined to this issue.
And I'll see if I can try to schedule them for either the next meeting or the first meeting in February, if the board would think that would be fine. Again, there's no expense or cost for that, to have them come out.
Okay. Well, I'm in favor of that. What's the sense of the board? Do we have 4 of us that are interested in this, or?
Yeah, certainly, I want to test the
I'm not.
pulse. And
I'll be talking to every voter next year. I'll test all the polls.
We can't be afraid of information, so we just have to.
I would think it'd be a good idea, particularly if this company can assure us that distribution of the survey is a fair one. I mean, there have been surveys done in this township where it's very easy to stack the deck, so to speak. That's the real key to a good survey, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Well, any other new business?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Just as a reminder, and I know Commissioner Mahoney had brought this up, and I know Commissioner Spengler and Commissioner Curley are involved. Next Thursday, January 13th at 7 p.m. here in this room will be an update on the status of the stormwater and the flooding issues, kind of where we're at, as well as also preparing for a mailing into a lot of the different neighborhoods of getting the surveys out to everyone, because I'm sure that there's a lot of the surveys that haven't gone out, but also to try to even see other areas of the township which we are finding out there's other areas of concern too as well, that we'll continue to try to keep doing that. So if there's areas within the township that have had some flooding or drainage concerns outside of the particular areas we've been looking at, it'll also be helpful too at the same time. So that's next Thursday, the 13th at 7 o'clock.
There's
here
a
in this
Parks
room.
and Rec Board meeting that night, Bob.
Okay.
So
can-
is
we can
that,
just
do you want
relocate that.
residents at that meeting?
Yes, if they can, it's great. So we can, if the Parks and Rec Board is here, then we can adjust that accordingly.
But I mean, do you want us to alert our constituents about
If
this?
you could, that would be great.
There was a good core group that came out to the first two meetings, the first at the senior center, the second one here. I know, Bob, you have the emails for those folks.
Correct.
If you'd send out a reminder email to them and ask them to let their neighbors know who are affected or interested in this question, it'd be very helpful.
Okay, we will do that.
And I mailed out the surveys to the people in my ward that have problems, and if they sent them in, if you could make sure they got notice
Sure.
of the meeting.
We can do that.
And Bob, is that advertised in the paper this week?
We'll make sure we get it onto the website and then try to get the information out as all that we can.
Okay, all right. I just have one item of new business. I had a complaint about parking on Garrett Avenue. Bob, if you could ask that this be put on staff traffic. On Garrett Avenue, the residents are given a certain number of parking permits. And like a typical household today with kids, you may have more than 2 cars. So I have a resident that's looking for additional parking. And we have an Emlyn Tunnel parking lot on Garrett Avenue that isn't really utilized at night, late at night. And I'm just wondering if there's some way to provide parking for the residents after a certain time at that lot. And if we could have staff traffic look at that.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, public participation. Any public participation?
Move to,
No,
Sarah.
somebody has to.
Quicker. Sarah Pelling from Garrett Avenue. John, they're allowed to use that lot with if they have a permit from midnight till 6 a.m. But what I want to speak to you about is there is more than one piece of property that I'd like this board to remember that should be on any kind of a list when land comes up to buy, and that's Emlyn Tunnel Field. If the school district sold that and a developer came in, you could have 20 to 30 more houses, and Garrett Avenue would die because we can't handle the traffic now, and it would be the last of our open space on Garrett Hill. So I hear we have to save our Drossen, and I respect that. But there are other small neighborhoods in this township that if they lose the open space they have, they're dead meat. Thank you.
Okay. We're adjourned. Thank you.